Let's do it.
There we go. After, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 attempts, we're back. It seems.
Was it that many? I'm sorry. I fucked up. I fucked up several of those.
Like that.
9th time's a charm.
They were all Eric's fault. All of them were Eric's fault. I put all the blame on him. No, it's like we all fucked it up at one point or another, you know.
I don't think I had a fuck up, just for the record, but you know.
Oh, that's true. That's
all you guys.
John's the consummate professional.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how you been? We were just talking about Nostr FOMO. So
absolutely.
How is everyone? It's been a while. It's been too long. I think the last one was the fall, over 6 months ago, I think.
It was. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was sometime in the fall. I think maybe October.
A lot of shit's gone on since then.
Was that pre-FTX or post-FTX that we did that one?
Pre.
By the way, you know what's funny? That feels like fucking ancient history now. Like at the time, I remember it being all-consuming to the point where like I was learning intimate details of the sex lives of the founders, and all of us were on Twitter, right? And then it just disappeared. Just like you didn't hear about it anymore, you know? And then there were obviously several more collapses that happened after the fact. And we're going through Credit Suisse right now, which looks like it's going to get nationalized. And I was listening to, Rob, I was listening to your space yesterday with Balaji, who I think we all like. This is what somebody asked me about Balaji and his $1 million prediction. I said, I believe everything that Balaji said, everything, except for the timeline. I don't know that I believe that timeline. I would like to maybe believe that timeline, but I just can't get there, you know?
But does he, I don't think he thinks Bitcoin is going to be worth $1 million or the US dollar is going to devalue that much in the next 3 months. I think he's more doing this as aside from any of his personal motivations, I think he's doing it to bring attention to this issue more than him, because if he thought that, he'd just buy it now with all of his available capital. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean,
he's probably done that too. I think it's a Paul Revere move. He's like,
that's what I'm saying.
The printing is coming.
Yeah, well, and like it's a bit like it's Max Kaiser's setting $100 on fire times 10,000. Like he's trying to show like this money is actually worthless. Like I have billions of these, so much so that I will set 1 million of them on fire to make an explicit statement that I can't set 1 million of these Bitcoins on fire. I have to say though, like the play out of all of this is so poetic, and what's the most beautiful is that like this whole cycle got set off as a domino effect by guys leveraging on the hype cycle that is now happening.
Yeah.
I mean, like the fact that whole arc goes all the way through is pretty incredible, And
Eric, do you mean like they were anticipating what's happening now, but just earlier and they got blown up as a result? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and literally because of their anticipation of it and the leverage in it, they then blew it up. That then caused for the very crisis that they've been waiting for. So it's just like, and this is just continually how shit comes up in this space. That's so beautiful. Is that like, it's literally like a Greek tragedy playing itself out with every single action having a deeper purpose. Like look at the board of people that are involved with SBF not with SBF, but with Silicon Valley Bank. Yeah, too many starting with S. Like it's literally the entire cast of characters from 2008, like reset inside of this. It's pretty funny.
Go ahead, Rob.
To go back to the just tying it to the FTX thing, I remember when that scandal was going on, there was this little diagram showing what FTX was doing, where they're basically printing new token, using it as collateral to borrow. And it was just this circular logic thing, right? Where it's a self-contained fucking financial illusion. And I remember thinking to myself at the time that that's exactly what the Fed and the Treasury do. It's like Treasury issues new shitcoin bond, Fed issues new shitcoin dollar to buy it, rinse and repeat. And I love how Balaji called this next wave of banking crisis something like Uncle Sam Bankman-Fried, because it's the same thing. It's the same principle mechanically, just in a different wrapper, different veneer. And I agree completely with Hodl. Like it all makes sense. This is the same thesis that Bitcoiners have been advocating for a long time. He just has an extremely aggressive timetable for it. And I feel a lot of dissonance because in one sense, it's like, all right, I hope the guy's right. That puts all the Bitcoiners on top of the world in a very serious way. But the world that we would be on top of, if the dollar collapsed in 90 days, like probably not a pretty one. So I guess I lean more towards the longer this takes, the better. You don't want it to take too long, obviously, but I think the longer the transition, the smoother the transition.
I'm with you entirely. And by the way, that Uncle Sam Bankman-Fried line was so fucking fire. I was pissed off I didn't think of it. I was like, God damn, that's good. You know what I mean? And Eric, to your point about this all being like a Greek tragedy, and it's like enthralling and enmeshing and entertaining and beautiful and poetic. That's all true until you realize you're a character in it, and then you go, oh shit, fuck. This might turn out bad. It's either gonna be really bad or really good. You know what I mean? So well, yeah, I'm with Rob though. I don't want it to take a super long time. I don't want it to be very short and unravel very quickly. I want it to take as long as possible. I want to get as many people on the lifeboat as possible. And I ran through the exercise in my head thinking through hyperinflation yesterday when I was hearing about this Balaji stuff. I said to myself, who am I going to be in that moment? And I determined that I am going to be one of the people that stands by the lifeboat. That's who I'm going to be. And if it means I have to go down with the ship, I will get as many people off the Titanic as humanly possible. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's, for me anyway, that's the answer I came up with.
Yeah, well, I think in some regards, all of us have already made that choice, because if not, we'd just be like anonymous NIMS, like, you know, living our best life somewhere. We're kind of already wrapped up in this in one way, you know, one way or the other. And you know, I agree. Well, Rob, what was your impression about like just back to Balaji's motivations for a moment? Like, do you think that's an actual you know, bet that he's making and planning to win, or again, you just think this is just a Paul Revere thing and he's trying to bring attention to it?
I mean, I think it's a Paul Revere thing, but also there's going to be, I don't think he's going to be taking much of a beating on this, right? I'm sure Balaji's very early to Bitcoin, so probably the spread that we've had in the last week more than pays for that bet for him.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Not to say that justifies it. Like it's still, he's still doing something. Even if you're doing the Paul Revere move, you're taking some risk, right? Or you're burning some capital, let's say, to kind of send a signal. You know, I don't think it's anything that's going to hurt him economically, but he's definitely burning some capital to make a publicity stunt. And I'm not saying that in a negative way necessarily. Like it's kind of it's a good thing, right? I had 50 people reach out to me about it, probably like through different channels, saying like, oh, did you hear about this? Do you know this guy? And like a few people, I would say of those 50-ish messages I got, like 5 people were like very serious, like, oh, I need to pay attention to Bitcoin now. So I mean, there's something to that, right? We can do all we want in the Bitcoin echo chamber, but you can't get that kind of signal to propagate without pulling a publicity stunt like that. So there's some value in it.
Well, that's
as far as I see the personal motivations. I don't know if there's anything else beneath that. I mean, maybe I'm missing something.
But I think that, I mean, it's beneficial from the perspective of Hodl just mentioned, you know, like it's a Greek tragedy until you realize you're a character in it. And I think people are beginning to realize, and this is obviously a big part of Balaji's point, is that you can become more of a spectator because we're all wrapped up in all this in some way, shape, or form, but you can insulate yourself to some degree, and probably to a large degree, from what's happening if you step into the Bitcoin realm, if you adopt Bitcoin. So yes, I mean, if what really unfolds, or if like this whole house of cards really collapses in a very rapid way, then yeah, everyone's lives are going to be disrupted in some way. But this is the way that you maximally insulate yourself from it. And then you go down the rabbit hole of being sovereign in other areas of your life. But obviously this is number one, right? Get your monopoly money and convert that into Bitcoin. And that's the way that you can at least sit back a little bit and be like, you can watch it with a little bit more entertainment value, sorry to say, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you can be a spectator of it rather than just being totally a victim of it.
Right.
So
yeah, it's a great point. The thing that concerns me though is, when you study these hyperinflations, when the markets collapse, that destroys everything, right? Like we got a little glimmer of it with COVID, right? Oh, supply chains are disrupted. I can't get toilet paper, this, that, and the other. It's like, well, take that times 1,000. That's a hyperinflation.
Yeah.
So even if you're sitting on a fat stack of rapidly appreciating Bitcoin, your life is still going to be disrupted.
Yeah, totally.
Well,
but you won't be destitute. You'll have something to trade, presumably. I mean,
sure.
If this all goes to hell in the next few months, I mean, is Bitcoin decoupling, or is this just a head fake? I mean, we don't fucking know. If the stock market's tank another 30-40%, do you really think Bitcoin's not going to go with it? I mean, that's the big question right now.
I messaged this to Balaji last night too. I was like, have you seen, I sent him the chart of the gold price during the Weimar hyperinflation, which you guys have probably seen. Like, it's all over the place.
Super volatile.
Right? It's not like gold just is up and to the right. It's up hundreds of percent one month, down 80% the next month, kind of thing. I would expect Bitcoin to do something similar. But there is, and he makes a great point though, that being that we're in the digital age, like that throws a whole nother weird dynamic into the situation, how quickly information and ideas move. So that either makes it way faster or way more volatile, or maybe both.
I'm really curious about the reflexive nature of Bitcoin in this, because we've seen plenty of hyperinflation before, but we haven't seen hyperinflation with a readily available lifeboat to gather into. And so I'm really curious if the reflexive dynamic, because as much as I have to be like, Balaji, I'm with you, that timeline doesn't work. The one thing I can point out is that he was the dude that called COVID totally. And even with COVID, it seemed like that timeline didn't make sense. And like that.
Well, not totally.
That timeline
he freaked out a little bit, so he called some of the changes that would happen as a result, but he was a bit of a hysteric as far as I remember.
Sure. And I think he's doing the same thing here as a bit of the Paul Revere. But I just have to wonder if that reflexive nature can get a feedback loop that's going to accelerate much quicker than any of us think, just because of the dynamic nature of the internet. The fact that Silicon Valley Bank lost $40 billion in one day, like that is such an absurd amount of money. Somebody did the math and it was something like $2 million per second a day, which that's such an absurd amount comparatively to any other bank run that has ever happened in all of human history. And the fact that they dealt with that and didn't collapse totally in terms of not being able to have liquid functions continue is, I think, a pretty powerful statement. So I'm curious to see how it all plays out.
I think just to double click on something that Eric just said, the concept of reflexivity for anybody in the audience who doesn't understand that fully, because it's a very important concept to understand, is basically can best be summarized as not only do minds move markets, but also markets move minds. And there's this constant interplay between the two. And I think the bank run thing that's happening now is definitely a reflexive phenomenon, because here's the secret. If anybody wants to know, there's no money in any of the banks, none of them. So what happens if the world figures that out at once? Suddenly you have a bank run pandemic. You have contagion that we've never seen before. You can't shut down all the social media. You know what I mean? The people that are smart, sophisticated money, like the guys like Peter Thiel, were calling founders and telling them there's going to be a bank run on SVB days before it happened, telling them to pull their money. And then that precipitated the bank run. And that can happen at every bank. And then it can domino from one bank to the next, to the next, to the next. And then the Fed would come in. The US government is not going to just allow the banking sector to collapse. So they would backstop everything. And when they backstopped everything, they would have to print more money than you've ever seen in your entire life to do it. Way more than what we saw in COVID. I mean, it would be 2 orders of magnitude beyond COVID. It would be 100 trillion to bail out the banking system. It would be something insane. So, I mean, there's a real risk of that. And people don't understand exponentials. We think linearly. Human evolution did not set us up to think exponentially. This is why things that are exponential, like viruses, they catch us off guard every fucking time and then decimate us. You know what I mean?
Well, this is why CBDCs are so important to them, because this is literally how they can print out $100 trillion, give it to people, and have it not have a direct effect. Because they go, no, this is something new. We're reissuing a totally new system. This is all backstop now. It's accountable directly to the Federal Reserve. And again, with the poeticness of everything, the fact that CBDCs could only be invented after Bitcoin by taking a corrupted version of the time chain, which is a shit coin called a blockchain, and then utilizing that expensive, highly modifiable database in order to create a central bank digital currency is, I mean, it's a bit of a chef's kiss thing. Like, mwah. Like Satoshi, in creating Bitcoin, you also had the original sin that had to be possible through the corruption of this form of a database. Beautiful.
I always go back to that quote that I'll just paraphrase it, like the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. And to Hodl's point, like we are not, you always have to take that quote always makes you just sit back in humility for a minute. It's like, no matter what you think, you know, what mental model you've got going on, even when you've run the spreadsheet, looked at the exponential decay function of Bitcoin and what you would expect that to do to its price or adoption, like you still have to sit back and take all that with a grain of salt and realize you're just an ape playing in the dirt that's not really wired to understand the implications of exponents. And exponents and power laws, they dominate natural phenomena, right? So we're kind of like living through one of those. And the reflexivity thing, I think it's just a feedback loop, right? I mean, feedback loops are everywhere in nature. It's how biology responds and relates to its environment. But what's weird about it with Bitcoin is that, you know, if the gold price goes up, well, gold production goes up, right? The new supply hits the market that's now being incentivized to be sold on the market. But with Bitcoin, price goes up and no new Bitcoin production never changes, right? It's 10-minute blocks. Whatever the algorithm says for that halving epoch is what the Coinbase subsidy is going to be. And so all of the Bitcoin price changes, I think, what do we call that? Like the perfect inelasticity of supply, that no matter how much Bitcoin's price changes, all of the changes in demand get expressed through the price, not expressed through new supply issuance, because Bitcoin supply issuance cannot change. And so I think that could be really interesting to see play out, right? Like, not only do we have faster reflexivity because we're in the digital age, but it's also a reflexivity on this absolutely immutable, perfectly fixed supplied asset. And you can't, you know, that's kind of like a release valve for the market. It's if the gold price goes way up, we'll let a bunch of new gold hits the market, and that sort of brings things to an equilibrium more quickly. But that's just not possible with Bitcoin. So this flywheel effect could be much longer lasting potentially. And I'm excited to see. I mean, I guess you're kind of like restating the thesis for hyper Bitcoinization on that point, but it'll be exciting to see what happens in the marketplace with that.
Does anyone know, in that Weimar chart that was referenced, has anyone heard an explanation for what caused such extreme volatility in such a, you know how many years that was? Was that like
those 2 years?
That was 2 years.
2 years.
So
yeah.
like, what's the explanation for how such wild, like, so you're in Weimar, shit's hitting the fan, hyperinflation happening everywhere. What constitutes the change in demand for something like gold, presumably a safe haven, during a period like that, where people are like, oh, fuck, like run to gold, and then months later, dump it, and then run to it again, push it even higher, and then months later, dump it?
Well, I know that there was a lot of, there was just like a lot of weird balance of payments things. I remember, it's been a long time since I've read about it, but I remember that like there were all kinds of crazy ass deals the German government was doing, like they would barter lumber for like coal, and they would like, so they, because the thing is that everybody didn't believe in the mark. And so I think a lot of it was sort of the chain reaction of various like nation states rejecting the mark as a form of payment, demanding only gold, or then them putting something else in addition to like, this is all of the reflex, you know, effed up thing that's going on, is everybody also knew that the mark was failing. So they were piling into stocks and gold and everything. And like, this is just like the giant, crazy effed up mess that happens when you start fucking with, you know, the most basic commodity of money, is that like nothing can price itself in a meaningful way. So the only thing that you have to do pricing is extreme volatility.
I just put it in the chat real quick. It's the chart I'm looking at least is 1914 to 1923.
Okay, I was specifically just looking at the, this one that goes from the bottom of at the end of 20 all the way up to 23.
Yeah, and those are the craziest years. Yeah.
I also think, one way to come to a conclusion about what may have happened during that time period is think through what you would do if Bitcoin actually did hit $1 million in the next 90 days. You would definitely make some moves. You would be like, I'm probably going to buy some real estate, probably going to get a bug out location. I'm going to do some stuff. And there would be these waves of dumping and then rebuying and dumping and rebuying. People would be trying to trade into different things. And there would be a reflexive phenomenon between the holders of, precious real estate, et cetera, and then people that wanted Bitcoin. And that's probably likely what was going on in Weimar as well.
Yeah. I mean, the Bitcoin chart today almost looks like that chart that Rob, you just put in there. I mean, you look at Bitcoin's 14-year history, and that's what it's been doing, It's been run up, crash, but it's just the price keeps going up, higher every time and crashing a little bit lower. And that seems to be what that chart is, So as so many people have remarked on or noticed lately, like Bitcoin seems to be the only true signal out there in the world today. It's 24-hour, you can't corrupt it. It's just it's a pure expression of what is happening in the market with no manipulation and no distortion. And so I think it's increasingly becoming and will continue to become like a forward signal sort of thing, like an early signal as to what is going to happen in other markets.
I mean, I'm just so fascinated at like, how the fuck did we get into a world where things are so corrupted, manipulated, contorted, and upside down that like Bitcoin is the only real market price signal that doesn't have institutional manipulation behind it? I'm always just taken aback by how fucking insane it is that we live in this day and age where like everything is so thoroughly corrupted that like I literally have to trust magic internet money as the only thing that's not going to fucking lie and steal from me. Like it's just so bananas. I imagine trying to talk to my great-great-grandfather about it and him just being like, yeah, man, just commit suicide. Like it's time to go on. Like don't do it.
Eric, this just underlines the point about how important the way the global reserve currency is structured. That is super important. That is sacrosanct. There is not a thing in this world that money doesn't touch. Money touches everything that's around me. It touches me. It touches you. It touches all of us, every single thing in the entire world. So when the money is corrupted, when the money is broken, guess what? So is the fucking world. You know what I mean? It always comes back to that point.
Well, it's amazing how like it seems to actually be like a fundamental linguistic function of that. Like if you are lying about your base value asset, like you are going to lie about everything.
Yeah.
We worked on this film series. I was like going into Carl Jung, and anyways, long short, we started to like see these parallels between kind of Jungian thinking. This is Mike Hill, who was on the show, and Mises and Austrian economics, right? They sort of came up at the same time. They're contradictory schools to the mainstream narrative. And they've both been kind of shunned by academia, like academia went towards postmodernism and away from the Jungian school in the same way, universities went towards Keynesian economics and away from Austrian economics. And one of the things we try to crystallize that parallel in this phrase, we said economics is public psychology and psychology is private economics. And so obviously economics being public psychology, you've got a bunch of minds wired together with a price signal, right? So like one big hive mind, allocating scarce resources in accordance with the preferences of consumers, et cetera. The psychology one's a little bit more mysterious, but the way I interpret that is, even an animal is making, like the leopard laying on the grass or in the tree, wherever he's at, he's running an expected value calculation before he does anything, right? It's not to say he's explicitly doing math, but he's deciding, how hungry am I? How fast is the gazelle? Is it injured? What's my probability of success? So there's this economic component even to like an animal psychology. And so I think that when you say money touches everything, like it's inside and out, right? Like internally, we're running the software called money. Externally, we're using it to run the economic system, run the pricing system, which is one of the most important communication systems in the world. And so we all understand this as Bitcoiners. I think we all struggle to like describe it with great scientific clarity, but it's the notion that's captured in, if you break the money, break the world, fix the money, fix the world. The fact that we have this economic ether that we're all swimming in, you could think of it maybe like a blood disease for the socioeconomic superorganism that we're all a part of. And, we're throwing different words at this thing, but basically it's money that connects us all together, right? It's the laptop that I'm using had inputs from tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that I'll never meet or know, yet I'm communicating with them as a consumer of a MacBook Pro. So when we corrupt that, or corrupt, I guess is the only real word for it. We corrupt that communication medium. Of course, it destroys everything we do, like everything we think, all the products we produce, all the institutions we create. And I feel like that idea that I'm trying to get towards is like the big idea all the Bitcoiners want to gush out onto the rest of the world. It's like, look, guys, it's so fucking obvious, but difficult to talk about.
I think that's also why it's the fiat system is so offensive to so many of us, because like whether you came into Bitcoin first or whether you just, revered ideals or ethics or values like honesty and integrity and humility and all that kind of stuff first, if those are things that you've valued and you've tried to integrate into your life and your perspective and embodied in various ways, then when you see this fiat system that you're forced to, let's say, interact with at least to some degree, I think that's why it's so offensive. Because as you say, Rob, I mean, there's an intuitive understanding that basically the market is just consciousness externalized in various respects. And we're seeing a corrupted consciousness. And we've all put in the work to clarify our consciousness, to constitute it in a manner that we deem to be most appropriate, most proper, most integrated with the most real things, the most truthful things, let's say. And when we see the manifestation of basically the opposite of that, or at least a highly distorted, corrupted version of that out in the market, it's so, we're so offended by it, which is also why those of us who felt that way, once the penny dropped for Bitcoin, it was so exciting because we realized this was kind of the extension of that properly integrated conscious framework, let's say, out into the world in the intersubjective space. And that's like a mind-blowing thing. And that's what makes you think that like you can correct so many, if you can correct those problems within yourself, now there's a mechanism to correct them in the intersubjective world via this tool. And yeah, I mean, what could be more exciting than that? And to your point about, this kind of being like a blood disease or a cancer, fiat being a blood disease or a cancer. I mean, I think that's also why the metaphors work so well, because like it's the sick patient where all they're doing is treating symptoms. All they're doing is putting more bandages. All they're doing is giving more drugs, making the pain go away, all that kind of stuff. And what you get is a zombie, is a vegetable, is someone who's, basically just on life support. And that bleeds into everything, even literal medicine that we've seen over the last 2 years that gets propagated out in the world. Whereas the reverse, the actual solution, is to heal the problem, is to get the systems of the body back into harmony, get them strong again, get them into a place where they can sustain themselves and grow. So, I think the metaphors work all the way up and all the way down because it's such a fundamental dynamic that's at play here.
Well, and this idea of like it being a medical treatment, I really like, because we can see the advent of fiat being to treat a disease that, started with essentially JP Morgan needing to bail out the United States government, and then followed by a number of successive crises where like we needed to have fiat money in order to scientifically and militarily develop in such a way. But through that treatment, like essentially we gave ourselves a huge amount of chemotherapy in order to try to get through the Great Depression and World War I and World War II. And by the end of World War II, we found we had actually killed, the body that was the state through fiat money. We got all of these crazy technologies that were developed. But now we were so far down this path of that, not only had the chemotherapy killed our victim and that we were keeping them artificially alive through a number of medical procedures, but now carrying that forward, the treatments essentially it's like continuing to re-up on your heroin addiction to try to get high. And it's now become so damaging and detrimental that, you know, I think if we talked to somebody in the 1930s about the need for fiat money and what it was doing, there would be more agreements and hemming and hawing. Whereas today it's just radically no, like it's clearly lying. It's clearly not helpful. There's no need for a state of emergency to try to save this system. Whereas at least in the 1930s, we could go, look, like we have to print out money to support the Manhattan Project so we can beat the Nazis because this is a really large crisis. But then at the end of that, we were like, oh shit, we've like destroyed the entire financing system. How are we going to address this in a meaningful way? And I just think that that history is important.
To bring this back to Balaji for a second, you know, Balaji has this very old framework from like the 2015 era. And I don't know how many of you guys were here then. Eric, you were for sure. You know, basically he was saying that, you know, it's voice versus exit, and that voice is like, you know, engaging the political process, and that exit is literally leaving the system into a new system, right? Now, the problem with this framework, and I think where Balaji got it wrong, is there's nowhere to exit to. We're all trapped. We're all trapped. And so Bitcoin is actually not exit. Bitcoin is actually voice. It's the reverse. And Bitcoin is, like Eric described, it's chemotherapy for the system. It's a transfusion for the system. It goes through and cleans up the cancer that's in the system. That's what Bitcoin's actually doing. Every dollar that bounces around the world creates a distortion wherever it goes. Bitcoins follow those dollars and clean the distortions.
Well, and this has also been my other point, is that like everybody knows, like Bitcoin's apolitical because nobody can control or manipulate or change it. And to me, that's what actually makes it the most political thing, is because there is no exit anymore. There isn't going to be a citadel. There isn't going to be Bitcoin Nation. It's going to be us in our own personal, direct political struggles against whatever our own systems are, whether they're nation states, counties, towns. But it's really about our own insistence saying fiat money doesn't work. It has corrupted everything. It has destroyed our cultures, our communities, and our families. And unless we take the responsibility of ourselves to say no longer will we allow for this control and power to be given to governments who not only don't have a right to it, but have so severely abused it, that we need to change the concourse of how we understand wealth. Without us directly approaching that question, we're just going to keep going through the cycles again and again. And so I think that's actually something that's going to present itself quite strongly here in the next year, is the true political aspect of what Bitcoin is.
I was in Manhattan with a friend recently, and we were talking about citadels, and I said, look around. This is it. You know, America's the citadel.
Well, that was
exactly.
You know, Balaji, I think in either in that tweet or in his presentation, you know, as part of this $1 million Bitcoin thing, I think he also was like, get out of the States now. And I'm thinking, like, where would you rather be if shit's going to go down? I mean, there's not.
Yeah, we had a hard disagree about
States
that.
States isn't perfect, but there's places in it that are better than anywhere else I can identify in the world, unless you're going to go like deep into Patagonia and just completely be, you know, off grid, under the radar, all that kind of stuff.
Well, we had a hard disagreement about that, because he was like, yeah, you should think about getting out. I'm like, no, man, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And like, there's a reason I'm in the deep red Bible Belt Christian South. And it's like, that is the place where people, you say taxation is theft, and people are like, yeah, no shit. Like, and I've got 30 guns at home, and I've got a big truck, and, you know, like people just naturally are disinclined to buying into that bullshit. So that idea of a non-compliant culture, I think, is really valuable. But when we say the States, I mean, the States obviously is a huge place. Yeah. San Francisco, what are they doing in San Francisco? I think they're about to pay reparations or something like that. I saw in a headline. I mean, so like, San the difference between San Francisco and Tennessee is like, is as much of a difference as you can find in the world almost.
By the way, you know, it's weird. Right after they announced that, I found out I actually have African-American ancestry. Like, so weird. It just, the email hit right after.
Yeah, I guess ancestry.com is on fire these days. Is that an actual thing? And even if it were,
it's very like,
it's not going to do that.
It's not going to go through. But the fact that they're sitting around debating these basically insane ideas, like Ron is talking about, it's crazy. It's like sitting, I mean, dude, we're at the end of an empire. Let's face it. All day long, I go on and like people on TV are talking about like what other people like. Should people chop off their dicks? Should they not chop off their dicks? Should we let the people that chopped off their dicks compete in women's swimming? And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. And somehow it's like crept up onto us and it's become a normal part of everyday life that we all sit around and talk about inane bullshit all day long. And it's a form of nihilism. You know,
but this is what I was thinking about, back to the conversation about the monetary system, is and it's just like a simple premise. If you don't do your best to align with truth, or if you don't even accept the premise that truth exists, then all you have left over to contend with is lies, deceit, delusion, all that kind of stuff. So 2 examples. One, the one you just gave, Hodl, right? Like we were talking about health before. And now, like, what does health mean today? Well, you can have someone that's 350 pounds and only eats McDonald's, and someone will be up there saying that's healthy. You can be healthy that way. And then the financial corollary, which happened recently, is, I don't know how broadly it's been applied yet, but all these banks, right, with whatever amount of bonds on the balance sheet, and they're way underwater. And then, with a stroke of a pen or policy change, the Treasury just goes, oh no, they're not underwater anymore. You can borrow against them at whatever you bought them for, like par value, right? Because that's how they're performing this, bailout or whatever you want to call it. They're just saying like, oh, those bonds that you're 60% underwater on, now you're not. You're totally not. You can borrow against them like you just bought them at the same price. And so it's just like, if you're not going to contend with truth, all you have is those lies, and that's how you get the distortions. That's how you get the incongruence with truth and all the different perversions that creates, because you either accept truth, align with it to the best of your ability, or you lie, you delude, you erect, false structures. And I think, by virtue of, well, probably for many reasons, who knows if the fiat system is a cause or an effect of some broader cause of that, mentality permeating through civilization. But that's what you get. And that's where we seem to be right now. But
I have the answer to that.
Go for it. I was just going to say Bitcoin is obviously the remedy to all that, but we all know that already. So you go, Eric.
Well, so fiat, it's fundamentally replacing the truth with an authoritarian decree. It is saying these things are fundamentally equal to one another. And because I am the sovereign, you must eliminate truth. And like, that is literally what fiat money is they say, this is worth something. I have the violent authority to be able to force that upon you, and you must accept it. And when you have that being the baseline of the entire operation of your society, and to be clear, this isn't just fiat money, it is all authoritarian decrees. So it's the entire fucked up tax structure that we deal with, all of the regulatory garbage and bullshit, the complete relegation of logic itself to be subservient to these authoritarian decrees. This has fucked up the world more than anything else. And I'm of the opinion it is literally cause for the inability for people to think. And when I say think, I'm explicitly referring to the ability to apply logic to whatever event is occurring. And most people can't do that, and that's what the pandemic was all about. It's an authority told me something that must be true. I will plug that in place of what my own eyes tell me. And to this very day, I still see people walking around outside with a fucking mask on, suffocating themselves, and I want to tear my hair out. And I just want to have a real dialogue with them, being like, is this helping you? Are you safer? Am I safer? Is the world safer from this perspective? And because they can't think, they fundamentally can't get there, and they want to fight you to be like, well, you're not listening to the authorities, so you're the bad one. And it's like, holy shit, you guys.
Here's where things get ultra complicated too, Eric, because thinking is extremely difficult. So you may be able to come to the conclusion that what you are being told is a lie, and then you may reject that, right? But if you come to the opposite conclusion that the opposite of the lie is the truth, that may not also be the case either. I was thinking about people who had died during COVID. Like, you can think about this on both sides. If you were a 65-year-old obese person who was a conservative, and you said, I'm not going to take that goddamn vaccine because the liberals made it, and goddamn it, I'm not doing that, and then you ended up dead, that was your fault, and you had a really hard time thinking through it. You were in 2 separate risk demos. You probably should have taken the vaccine, right? Meanwhile, if you were like a young liberal male who was 25 and jacked and fit, and then you took 6 different boosters and you got a myocardial infarction, guess what? And then you end up dying. That one's your fault too. And both of these people had errors in their thinking. And this happens with the fiat system. So yeah, it's true that the fiat system is a lie, and that the people that are perpetuating the fiat system, the American elites, are intent on lying and gaslighting you. All of that is true. But the rejection of that system is, you meet a bunch of people who are into shitcoins and they go, hey, bro, you heard about Web3 DeFi monkeys? And you go, oh, yeah, that must be obviously fiat's not the thing. And then you have to come to the rational middle ground of like 20,000 shitcoins are bullshit. All of the fiat currencies are bullshit. Bitcoin is the only thing that's real in the entire world. And that is such a bizarre, non-intuitive conclusion to come to, that like the collective brain power on this Zoom right now is like 400 IQ, and it took all of us fucking 20 plus collective years, 5 years for you, me, to come to this conclusion. That's how goddamn difficult it is, right? So it's not going to be easy for people, and a lot of people are going to get harmed in the process, unfortunately. So that's why we got to save as many as we can.
This goes way back.
Shitcoining is fiat as well. And to me, like, this is one of the reasons why I use the term crypto sovereignty, is that, like, without using logic to come to the conclusion that Bitcoin is literally the only thing that isn't fiat, because it's the only thing that has proof of work baked into it in such a way that it literally proves to you through the substance that it is, that it has done the fundamental work in order to conclude itself to be part of the truth that is nature. Whereas shitcoins, there's always something fucking fictionalized about it. And so I just find it really interesting and ironic that, like, the literal cryptography that is to be used to prove the work has been done has been corrupted and extricated in such a way that now the fucking word itself can't even refer back to itself in any meaningful way. It's fucking ludicrous.
Shout out crypto sovereignty.
By the way, real quick, I just realized when I said the collective brain power was 400 IQ, that makes us all retarded. So that's my bad.
I was going to say, like, he must be factoring in like 40 IQ.
600 IQ is what
We're all average. We're all average. So just to, like, I mean, because sometimes words, we're always saying Bitcoin is truth and freedom. Like, it is sad. Like, these words have been destroyed basically in the current fiat paradigm, right? You say these words and people are like, oh, this guy is, I don't know, arrogant, or like, if you say you're trying to speak the truth or live in truth, it sounds like either a postmodernist weird thing, like everyone's living in their own truth, or you're have some kind of messiah complex, right? Like, oh, you've figured out the truth, everyone else is speaking a lie. Which is one of the reasons I think Jordan Peterson's chapter, right? He says, what's the rule? Don't tell the truth, or at least don't lie, I think is the title of that chapter.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I think about here is, if you just consider a lie as a misrepresentation, right? It's not an accurate message about what it's intended to represent. That's what printing money is, right? It's when you create new money out of nothing, you're representing to the world that there are more goods and capital available than there really are, right? Tir de Meester wrote a good piece on this. I think he called the printing of money something like the creation of illusory goods. Like, it just creates this image of goods and capital available in the world as a nominal expansion in the money supply that doesn't actually exist. So of course, this like propagates through a distorted price signal, which is like destroying people's economic rationality, right? This is what contributes to misallocation of capital, overborrowing, mispricing of risk, the boom and bust business cycle, all of these things, because we're propagating a false signal through the printing of money. And you're quite literally in that situation, because a price is an exchange ratio between two goods. You're destroying economic rationality, right? So it's not surprising to me that when you destroy this collective psychological rationality that we call economic rationality, that you're creating feedback into individual rationality, individual psychology, the creation of illusory goods through the expansion of money is actually fucking people up, right? It's making us dumb and or evil, I think, just by participating in the motivational system that is fiat. And so I have a question, I guess, sort of about this to Eric. I think there's this quote that political power emanates from the barrel of a gun. I think it was Mao or Mao said that. Clearly, that's not the political power of Bitcoin, though, because there's no barrel of a gun backing Bitcoin. So what was Mao wrong about that, or what is the source of Bitcoin's political power?
It's actually the inversion of that barrel of a gun. It negates the barrel of the gun, because now you can kill somebody, but you can't get their Bitcoin, and that's fundamentally different. In addition to Bitcoin's extremely rudimentary right now. We literally have the units and we can pass them around, but we don't have strong, sophisticated dead man keys contracts or any of these other more esoteric ideas. And to me, as this plays out more, it will offer a counter to that thesis, because also Mao originally said that. It's funny that you brought this up, because I looked up the quote 2 days ago, and Mao originally presented it in the 1928 Comintern that they had for China. And then this was emphasized throughout his philosophy later on. And so they talk about that quote and about how the Communist Party always needs to own the guns, and it needs to push that onto the whole of society, so that they're the purveyors, they're the only purveyors of legitimate violence. And so to me, what Bitcoin does is it delegitimizes all violence through its direct form in the world. And that the relationship between violence and economics is now fundamentally broken in a way that has never been accomplished in all of human history. And to me, that's the political thing that inverts everything. That this makes a totally new form of what I would say is that this reopens the polis, which is the fundamental political form that ancient Greeks and Romans had access to. And that was the life that was available outside of the home life to be created by people. And to me, since the end of World War I, the polis has been completely shut down and forbidden from anyone to access because of the forms of statism that we've had. And now that we have Bitcoin, there's this new form of the political that's rising up that isn't about voting, that isn't about nation states, that isn't about these forms and organizations that we've classically called political. So to me, that's really what crypto sovereignty is about, is that it fulfills the idea of cutting off the king's head in a very new and novel way that we had never seen before, through the ability to hide and keep a secret in the digital sphere in a way that was never available to all of humanity before, and will be available to all of humanity moving forward. So this is why I think essentially we're at what I think is the apexal moment of not only politics, technology, but essentially this is the transition of humanity from being a type 0 to a type 1 civilization. And what that means for us as conscious beings, as people with souls, as human beings that want to create a better community together, individuals that want to return to truth. It's very Kali Yugic in terms of us coming to fulfill all of the destiny of man. So
if you look back through history, essentially anybody that ignored the rules and then chose violence, that's a win. That's a win. And you get power for doing that, right? Now that we have Bitcoin, if you ignore the rules and you choose violence, lose. That's a lose-lose. You know what I mean? And so I totally agree with everything Eric said. That's why it's such a big deal.
So I have a question. I talked to a guy that's involved with the Libertarian Party here in the United States, and I didn't know anything about this history. I don't know if you guys did, but apparently they had a takeover recently where the Libertarian Party had, the Mises Caucus. They basically reclaimed the Libertarian Party, as I understand it, to be more consistent with the traditional values of libertarianism. Whereas over the past couple of decades, the Libertarian Party had drifted into a pseudo, left-wing thing. I'm not exactly sure. The point is, they are interested in integrating more closely with the Bitcoin community and actually trying to make more of these grassroots efforts of getting people into local office that are Bitcoiners. And instead of trying to just run a libertarian candidate for president that is going to lose because it's either going to be red or blue and you're going to have this other guy get 1%, they're throwing that whole strategy out of the window and really trying to focus on the grassroots long-term game. So I just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on what is it because I fucking hate politics. Like, I don't think there's anything I hate
Yeah.
more. But now that I think about it, that we're stepping into our roles in history, right? We're not just spectators of history. We're now participants. Increasingly, we're participants as Bitcoin does its thing. Is it incumbent upon us to take that, nascent influence or power or whatever we have and try to actually do something grassroots in the US if the US is the citadel, as we were saying earlier?
I think, like, just a piece of practical advice, if you're part of the Libertarian Party, rebrand to the Bitcoin Party and repent for all the stupidity over the last few years. And if you think I'm a young, cocky douchebag, yeah, I am. And we subsumed and superseded your entire ideology. We're the only practical form of libertarianism in the whole fucking world. If you can't see that, you're too stupid to do anything. Go fuck yourself. But also, hit up Rob. I'll talk to you in the background, okay? I'll let you know.
Yeah, I mean, like, the thing that led me to Bitcoin and why I'm still here is, like, I'm an anarchist through and through. Like, fuck the state from top to bottom. I absolutely hate this idea of an organizational form that involves whining and getting people that I frankly think are worthless on board to your cause simply because they can mark a tally. I'm very, very interested in grassroots movements in terms of getting Bitcoin in the hands of people. And last time I was on Marty's show, I had a long dialogue with him about the only thing I'm interested in contemporary politics in accomplishing is passing Article 5 legislation to 35 different states in order to amend the Constitution of the United States directly outside and beyond the purview of both the President of the United States or congressional approval. And this is a theoretic way that states can directly ratify the Constitution by circumventing the federal government. That is the only thing I'm interested in, is passing Article 5 legislation that explicitly puts in the United States Constitution as an amendment that Bitcoin is the fundamental form of money that the United States government will use. Outside of that, I have zero interest, because to me, politics is the most nihilistic form of politics that exists, because it says that you as a lone individual are absolutely worthless and can do nothing whatsoever to change or modify the system. And I reject that wholly. So
I'm somewhat torn on that issue. I mean, I think the Libertarian Party is pretty pathetic as well. And, like, from a practical perspective, if that, like, it's because so, like, ideology and philosophy doesn't seem to have that rigid of guardrails anymore. So why not run? So I'll put it this way: why not run in the Republican Party and just be libertarian? Yeah, there's a lot of that these days. I mean, like, DeSantis is kind of that way, and Ramaswamy is kind of that way. Like, I mean, who cares? Nobody cares what you call yourself. People only care, like, the ideas you espouse. So everyone knows that, like, the third party is never going to get in. So why not just, play ball in one of the two and then enact whatever fucking policies you want if you get in? That seems to be what everyone does anyways. But I'm somewhat torn on Eric's point, is like, I get it. Like, the state is corrupt and irredeemable and, driven by violence and all that kind of stuff, and illegitimate, whatever, in many ways. But it's still the case that it erects a type of order for the world that we exist within. And it's still the case that order has gradations of quality, let's say. And so let's bring it down to more of like a municipal or local level. I see Eric smiling, but just the point being that, is it better? And I know you're giving tacit approval if you take this approach and all that jazz. So this is a question. I don't really know where I stand on this, but is it not better if you have someone who you would broadly construe to be more principled, more ethical, more competent, and all that kind of stuff in a position within that system of order than whatever the alternative might be? And I'm open to hearing your thoughts on like what the alternative to people coordinating together to establish a certain form of order might be.
I mean, I can answer first, but my answer is pretty much insane. So, so Carl Schmitt, he talks about something called the Kachion, which is a classic idea of that which withholds, that which holds back total like disorder and lawlessness, and that which makes sure that the Antichrist can't present himself to the world, because that then initiates the apocalypse. I think the state in its form today is the Kachion. And once that the power of the state is generally removed, or the way that I see it, it's going to be superseded by technology, that then creates the opening for the apocalypse to present itself and for the final struggle for humanity to redeem itself presents itself, which is only offered they can fully engage in their subjective decision in order to create something different. So like, I pretty much want to destroy everything to get the table totally clean so that then people can make a choice for themselves about what they want to do going forward. And so like, essentially this philosophy is deeply accelerationist of that. Like, I not only want to destroy the state, but I want to accelerate things to such an extent that we arrive at the apocalypse itself so that we can move through it. And I think that's all coming to fruition right now, which is some of my crazy shit.
What's on the other side of the apocalypse?
A kind of peace that we never imagined humans could even have.
Apocalypse means revelation of knowledge, by the way, right? Not end of the world.
Or re-revealing or something. It's not, fire and brimstone like people often imagine it to be. But so Eric, put some meat on that.
Yeah, I think that the possibility of a hyper-Bitcoinized world where everybody truly understands and groks what this means and is integrated into society, I think that produces a kind of globalized world peace in a way that we have never seen before and that we could never even imagine before. Because
Is Eric gone?
I think Eric's gone.
New materials, where access to all sorts of new stuff. Oh, sorry. But of course, my fucking shitty internet.
We lost you for a sec.
Yeah,
every time
essentially.
you peek.
Yeah, exactly. Essentially, this opens humanity up to developments that weren't possible when war and violence has always been an economic incentive that's available. That is off the table now. So like when you have a war going on in a place like Ukraine right now, that would absolutely decimate both sides horrifically because of the amount of economic, I don't know the right word, but like essentially because they have to take on so much of that economic load themselves, and they can't just do it through taxation and fiat. And again, I get this is a crazy idea.
No, I know, but I want to flesh it out a bit because, maybe it's legit. But I'm assuming you're not proposing that, some utopia lies on the other side of the apocalypse, because I don't think you're that naive to suggest something like that. So in this theoretical place or time, what are the problems that you think would still plague individuals or society, and how would they be resolved or managed?
Well, human stupidity is limitless, like all other things. And I think, in all honesty, most stuff looks relatively similar. I think what ends up happening is that the state has to negotiate with people much, much more than it ever expected. I think that they will actually have to have total fiscal responsibility in a way that they have never had before. I think that this will create a new form of civics where people are engaged in a very different way. I think that essentially the entire governmental structure inverts itself to where communities become the most powerful political entities, followed by counties, followed by states, and then followed by a federal government. People are going to do dumb shit. They're going to lose keys. They're going to leverage. But I think the biggest one is that no longer is there going to be an ability for there to be violent fiat decrees that can have power over people. I think for the most part, most things need to be openly and in goodwill negotiated in a way that currently people just force things through. So a little opaque there, but
yeah, I can see that for sure. But going back to this like pure no government premise, like presumably in that place and time, people will still want to coordinate, and people will still there'll still be an element of trust in the system. There will likely still be an element of delegating some form of your authority to other people in some capacity. So I get your point that like the state won't be able to enforce it in the way that it currently does. But is not that a form of politics? Just people getting together to coordinate in ways that don't naturally happen economically. And because you said like some people are stupid, some people are old, some people are withdrawn, whatever, there will be a delegation to others, family members, trusted friends, institutions, whatever, to perhaps make decisions for them, be a proxy vote in some kind. I mean, if you're fucking homeowners association or something, you just say, hey, I don't give a fuck enough. Like you vote for me, bro.
Yeah,
do you think that's a form of politics?
Yeah, and I think that's the way it'll go, is that instead of us almost having this vertical structure of a singular government, it's going to be this gigantic explosion of there being hundreds, if not thousands, of various relationships that all sort of interlink together in various ways. And this is really what anarcho-syndicalism is that essentially people organize on their own accords according to whatever the organizational needs are, whether that's a water collective, a garbage collective. And I want to be clear, the organizational getting through to this place, this is insanely messy. And it's only through how messy and crazy it all is that people are going to start choosing the alternatives. So like the downslope on this is it goes real deep.
Sure. All right. One last question, then I'll stop. But in this place, where do you think power most concentrates, right? Because in this hyper Bitcoinized world, power gets dispersed dramatically. And so, you know, all the things that we typically talk about, the benefits of distribution of power and authority and that kind of stuff. But as far as you've thought about, you know, this potential future, where is it that power either, you know, could potentially concentrate, and how, to what degree would that be deleterious to the circumstance?
I think the way it concentrates, and I don't think it would, I think there are negotiations with it, but essentially, like, I think this returns man to a place of honor and dignity and being your word. And that, like, what a man says and essentially his, quote, proof of work, that is going to be the place that people gather power. And so that when somebody says something and follows through with that, when a man proves himself to be a man of his word, that people are going to congregate behind those individuals, and that we're going to see something that looks much more, and this is like a really scary word for some people, but
kings?
We would close fascism. And like fascism in the classical sense of the word, as in a Roman dictator.
It's good fascism,
well, as in a Roman dictator who chooses to take upon the cords of the laws for himself. You know, what Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco represented was a really malformed cult version of the personality of that. Whereas if you look at the classic Roman fascist, who comes from the word fasci because they were the ones that controlled the axes that were used to be able to implement law, they become the individual that electrifies it and enacts it. And I think one of the problems is that we live in a world where I can be a politician, do a bunch of super corrupt up shit, and people are like, that political system, it's so corrupt. And no, like, I'm the corrupt piece of shit. Like, chop my head off and make me an example to the rest of the people, so that when people go and do fucked up stuff like this, there's a great example for it. And again, like, I think that's one of the other class things, is us moving away from capital punishment, particularly for political crimes, I think has been a huge detriment to society. You know, like, I would really love if when people violated the law in a political way, that, like, you know, we drew and quartered them, and we made it clear that, like, you will be violently punished for the ways that you abuse our political system.
I wouldn't mind hearing the other guys respond to that.
Well, I was just thinking through what you asked, and it seems to me like, so maybe one of the fundamental contributions of Bitcoin is that this notion of power we have today, which is another one of those words, right? It's just loaded. Are we talking about political power? Are we talking about physical power? Are we talking about legal power, et cetera? Bitcoin sort of simplifies the whole thing. It's just like, it's purchasing power, right? Who has the purchasing power kind of decides where they go, what rule sets they live by, who they interact with, et cetera. So maybe that's one thing, is like, Bitcoin just sort of simplifies this whole notion of political power down to just, maybe not just purchasing power, but mostly purchasing power, at least make purchasing power the most important form of power as a determinant of social organization, I think, because violence is not, it's not profitable, or it's less profitable as a result of Bitcoin.
It's the orange rule. He who has the Bitcoin makes the rules. The orange rule.
Exactly. Beautiful. And so in that world, now I'm just kind of like thinking out loud here, wouldn't power, or at least purchasing power, would then concentrate into the hands of the elders and the innovators, basically. Now, the elders, I'm thinking if we're in this new world where there's a lot of innovation, presumably we're extending the human lifespan more, right? There's a lot of efforts toward this end. I'm not a transhumanist. I don't believe in living forever, but I do think humans can keep expanding the human lifespan. So obviously those people that live a long time would have the longest period through which to accumulate and preserve purchasing power. So they would have a lot of the power in the world. But then also the innovators, right? The people that are actually delivering these productivity enhancing solutions to the human race would win a lot of purchasing power in this kind of entrepreneur-led society. So I mean, I'm thinking, I guess out loud, that power would accumulate in the hands of those two cohorts, which seems like a good thing, right? You've got old, wise, rich people kind of living by example for younger people to follow. And then you have people that are delivering useful technologies as also serving as an example for young people to follow. And I guess we have some semblance of that today in kind of capitalistic, pseudo-capitalistic US compared to societies of yesteryear, right? Like we have the Elon Musk and people of the world that are more entrepreneurs. They've accumulated power through their entrepreneurial efforts. But we still have a lot of status too, right? Like the richest guy in the world is Putin, I think. So Bitcoin just moves us further along that curve to where the people that really have the power in the world are the old and the wise, or the innovative, I suppose, would be my hypothesis.
I think the place I always come to when I think about this kind of stuff is that the nuclear warheads never go away, and the person that is in control of them is the state, because they can basically just say, I'll nuke you, I'll nuke me, I'll nuke everybody, give me taxes, fuck you, right? That's a problem. Another problem is Bitcoin can't prevent a sovereign from issuing a currency. There's just no way to prevent that. And as we've seen over time, humans love to do that. It's it's always expedient, gets you out of short-term problems. And the people that put a system like that in place, they don't have to deal with the consequences ever, because they die, right? And then they leave their children and grandchildren to deal with the consequences. So I think we're moving into a place where the state is going to be supplanted by the network, right? I'm in alignment with Balaji about that. But I don't think the state's going to go away entirely or dissolve. I think it'll be like the Catholic Church. Like the Catholic Church was supplanted by the nation state. The nation state is supplanted by the Bitcoin network. But the Catholic Church is still here. It's still a force in the world. It's not what it once was. But it had grown to, a cancerous scale where it was harming people. And I think the modern, version of the nation state has also grown to a cancerous scale where it's mainly doing harm to people. And so once things get like that, you basically have a new system that emerges and it knocks the old system back in its place, but it never fully goes away. There's always vestiges of it.
I would just say two things. One is I do think that Bitcoin will actually deal with the nuclear warhead issue by, as states go totally broke and they struggle desperately to find money, they will have to convert their nuclear warheads into becoming nuclear reactors, which I was reading a pretty significant amount of nuclear warhead material can be used to create a nuclear reactor. So I think they'll go in that direction. And I agree that the state won't go away. I think federal governments are going to dwindle precipitously in power. And I think that we're going to get a renewal of sort of the American dream vis-a-vis states. Like, I think states are going to assert themselves against the federal government in the coming crisis. I think the federal government is going to lose. And I think that in that, states are going to become quite dynamic and innovative. And in addition to that, we're going to get places like Texas that are just going to straight up make Bitcoin into a currency for their state, and I think that that's going to have a very positive general affect.
The nuclear warheads thing was always one that I was like, man, fuck, how does that problem get solved? But
right,
I think the incentive to mine Bitcoin is actually a pretty decent theory about how that problem gets solved. Like, people are going to be like, let's convert this shit in, with the advent of small nuclear reactors and stuff, like, let's convert this material to mine Bitcoin. That's where our primary incentive is. And, does the stockpile get dwindled down as a result of those incentives? Is it just another instance of the incentives that are emerging around this radical form of intersubjective truth is able to dissolve the manifestations of intersubjective distortion and power and lies and delusion and all the stuff we've been talking about.
Makes sense, because right now
agree with
carrying an inventory of nuclear warheads, that's a huge expense just to maintain that inventory. But if there does, I didn't know that, this is the first I've heard of this, but if there's a way then to instead convert that inventory, which is costing you money, into money, that seems like a path some people would follow. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I agree with Eric too in the sense that, you know, back to Bitcoin being like a cleaning infection of the current system, or like chemotherapy for the current system. I think Bitcoin, restarts the engine that is America. And if we go back to our early American history, all the way back to 1776, America is an experiment in decentralization. Always has been, always should be. And somewhere along the last 300 years, we lost that. And it would be amazing if Bitcoin could help us get back to that. And I do think you saw like a little bit of that during the pandemic, where different states were saying, no, we're not going to comply with that. And, Texas is now enshrining the right to use digital currency into their constitution, or not their constitution, but, they're putting it into law. And so I do think it's going to be really interesting if you have states pushing back against the federal government. And it depends on which state you're in, right? If California wants to secede, you'd be like, sit down, pussy. You're not going anywhere. If Texas wants to secede, you'd be like, Texas, let's talk about this, man. Don't do anything crazy, bro. Okay.
Well, Texas is also the only state that explicitly has it in their constitution that they have a right to secession, and that was never fully brought up as a predication that happened in the Civil War. And to answer your question, Hodl, where shit went wrong was the Civil War. And just how the Civil War played out on a number of levels, because both the legal ramifications, and also that was the first time that the United States explicitly issued a fiat currency for the purpose of war.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Can you go on a bit more on that, Eric? I'm
was
curious.
That 1813? Wasn't there something that happened in 1813 though that precipitated that?
That was the collapse of the first bank of the United States, with which Andrew Jackson, I think it was 1914. Maybe, Andrew Jackson came later with the collapse of the second Bank of the United States. The first Bank of the United States was a problem, and that collapsed in 1812, and they renewed it in 1814, I think under Monroe, who then it came up for renewal under Jackson. He refused to do it, and then moving forward, we had the wildcat banking era that lasted all the way until 1862. Where essentially the Union was struggling in their conquest against the Confederacy. And this is when Lincoln made the decision that they were going to issue greenbacks, which is where the term comes from. And greenbacks were a fiat country. They were a fiat money that was explicitly issued to raise money for the Civil War so that they could fight them, because the Civil War is super interesting, because essentially like the Union just like fucked up repeatedly over and over. And then it had like generals in power who like totally sucked ass at what they did. Yeah. You have a chance to look at General McClellan. McClellan's like the biggest pussy who ever existed to ever command an army. Like there's a great quote of where McClellan's like looking at a river being like, oh, like we like can't cross this. This is too bad. And Custer literally rides his horse out into the middle of the river. And he goes, McClellan, it's this deep. We can totally go over it. And he's like, no, it's right here.
Lincoln kept sending McClellan letters like, would you fight, you goddamn pussy? And he's just like, not today. I woke up feeling weird, man. And the vibes are off, dude. I can't,
Yeah. Meanwhile, Grant's just like, let's get fucking drunk and do this.
Yeah, exactly. They replaced him with an alcoholic for that very reason,
Actually, to be fair to Grant, though, he didn't drink when he was fighting. He just drank afterwards to deal with his PTSD. So I don't want to make it sound like he was a bad soldier. He was just fucked up as a human from what he did.
John may not know this as a Canadian, but in the South, some people still refer to the Civil War as the War of Northern Aggression, because the South seceded basically, and we're our own goddamn nation. We're going to do whatever the hell we please. And the North was like, the hell you are, and that caused the Civil War. And so, if we do start to see the states push back very strongly against the federal government, it's very likely there will be another Civil War. Although I don't know how a Civil War looks in the digital age. I think that's a really interesting question.
I had a series of Dominic Frisby about this. He wrote that book, Daylight Robbery, which is about like the history of taxation. It's a super interesting book. There's one episode with Civil War in the title, but he describes how it was a war fought over taxation. Like basically the South was, I hope I have the numbers right. We were 1/3 of the population, but we were paying 4/5 of the taxes, something like that. Like we were paying a disproportionate share of the tax base for the collective union, the North and South together. And so the South was like, tried to secede peacefully and finally just said, fuck you, like we're out. And essentially it was Lincoln going to war to reclaim the tax base, which is such a weird episode to go through with Dominic, because I'm reflecting on all of my indoctrination in public school about the Civil War as he's telling me this. And it's like, no, we were told it was this moral crusade against slavery. It's like, no, it had fucking absolutely nothing to do with that. It was just a business deal, basically, right? A bunch of customers were saying,
wasn't it Lincoln who said at some point in the war, like, if I could end this war without freeing the slaves, I would do so? There's some quote like that attributed to Lincoln, I believe.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because like this is one of the reasons that so like Lincoln essentially committed treason in the way that he started the Civil War. And the reason why he needed to be so forceful with passing the 14th Amendment was because that then essentially recused him from that treason, because now he could point and say, look, it's an amendment. They were violating the Constitution. I, as the president, had a right to assert the Constitution over the Southern states for this reason. But that's only when he came to the realization as a lawyer that like he had fundamentally committed treason. And if he ended the Civil War without that there, he could be put on trial for treason as well. And so not to say that slavery wasn't a component of it, because like that's definitely one of the reasons why Northerners were more aggressive towards asserting that. But like that, in the same way that like the pandemic and all of the responses were about like saving your health. Yeah, that was like 38th on the list, but it was about like all this fucking money on numbers 1 through 38. That was the real reason why. So
it's kind of
makes us feel real good now that we can be like, we loved all the black people and we liberated them. But let's never have any dialogue in public school at all about all the fucking white Irish slaves that were in the United States.
It's like how Putin's justification for invading Ukraine is like, we're denazifying Ukraine. It's like, yeah, sure the fuck you are. That has nothing to do with why you're over there.
Yeah, but it's also on the other side, it's like Putin's only invading Ukraine because he's evil. That's why. And that's why you should be against. Are you an evil person? No, you're good, aren't you? So you should be against it. I mean, everything is so watered down or obfuscated or like black, ostensibly or framed to be black and white when it, almost nothing is. I mean, why would we ever even suspect that we would know the motivations of most things that happen in the world? Think about when anything you've ever done in terms of like a business project or a work project, whatever, like you talk it out, not that you're intentionally being secret, but you talk it out in the boardroom with your partners, whatever, and then you go and execute in the world. And it's not like everyone knows all of your motivations. And it's just, it's so absurd to think that well, I mean, again, this is the part of the critique that we've been levying against the current world as it is that everything is so dumbed down, so simplified, and everyone just is so trusting about listening to those authority figures. One of the things just on the Civil War front that I found fascinating, I watched that Ken Burns documentary, like 10-part series or whatever.
Ooh, yeah.
Really great, really
super
great.
Good. Yeah.
Well, what's it called? It's on American history or something. It's really good.
It's just called The Civil War by Ken Burns. Very good.
Yeah. Oh. Now I've seen him on CNN and stuff lately, and he's getting on with some perspectives, let's say, that I don't fully agree with, but the work itself I thought was phenomenal. And one of the things that struck me there, because I didn't really know much about the Civil War prior to that film, but these days they're tearing down Robert E. Lee statues like all over the fucking place, right? Because racist, bad guy, whatever. And I was just struck by how badass he was. Like he was an incredible leader and like a very ethical, and he didn't enter the war because he like wanted he was on the side of slavery, let's say. He was from Virginia and his primary loyalty was to Virginia, and he was like, well, Virginia is part of the South, and so I'm going to protect my my homeland. I'm going to protect where I'm from and my people and my family and stuff. So, okay, I guess I'm on this side of things. And he was such an honorable character. And to see him now, like the inversion of that, presumably, if my assessment is correct, whereby everyone's just, treating him as a Hitler type character and erasing him from history, is just ridiculous. And it also speaks to this thing that we do when we character assassinate people is, if anyone has any flaw that's currently in the crosshairs of a culture or a country or whatever, nowadays you want to just eradicate them. You want to get rid of them. Instead of saying, like, one, recognizing nobody's fucking perfect. Nobody. So start from that premise. And what follows from that is, okay, some people everyone's going to have good characteristics, admirable characteristics, ones that you might want to mimic in some way or adopt, and ones that you want to ignore, dismiss, what have you. And should we not assess things in that way and then look at how they were able to embody the good characteristics that they did and learn from those? You don't have to adopt all the bad ones. You can recognize them even and analyze why, how come they didn't establish a better balance. But we have this, this culture where it's like, if something finds itself in the crosshairs of the existing narrative, you're banished immediately. And again, the last 2 years of COVID, there's a billion examples of how that's taken place. And I look forward to a period in education and all that kind of stuff where we can be more discerning with how we analyze the characters of history, not just glorify the military leaders and not just dismiss like the baddies. And we look at character traits and actions they took, and we really try to understand and analyze them so that we can better adopt or embody them in our own lives and recognize when we're veering too much into the realm of those behaviors that we would be critical of, and just be more conscious of it all generally. But yeah, Robert E. Lee was kind of made me crystallize that point in my mind when I watched that documentary, because he seemed like a pretty badass dude.
I mean, on your point about rejecting, like heretical characters, like that's something that's like led me in my research that's been really powerful. Because like Schmidt, I think, should have straight up been hung at the Nuremberg trials, and like and Heidegger was obviously a shitty person. And the hilarious thing is about their philosophies getting integrated into Nazism is their philosophies have absolutely nothing to do with Nazism. They were both just fucking opportunists, and that was the right time. And they were both burned horrifically by their fucking opportunism. Schmidt, like Goring literally went after Schmidt and made sure that he couldn't have any more advancements in his careers. And same thing with Heidegger. He went and presented his philosophy as being part of Nazism when it was anything but. And later they both had to try to recuse themselves from it. They couldn't do it. And because of the way that they had, quote, sullied themselves, they created the opening for postmodernism in philosophy, which has just led us off into a fucking insane direction, which I want to be clear, like, there is some value to it, but most of it's fucking gobbledygook that I don't find valuable at all. And it's really offensive to me that, and the same reason, like, I've read Lenin, I've read Mao, I've read Hitler. They all, Hitler actually doesn't have anything interesting to say. It's like a pretty rudimentary and dumb fucking philosophy. But both Lenin and Mao have really valuable things to say from the perspective of what a sociopath who's pursuing power wants, And like it's really interesting. In Mao's 4 philosophies, he's pretty much like, yo, if you want to be a communist, like, get comfortable with killing people. Like, you're gonna have to kill a lot of people. And if you're not interested in that, don't read this book. It's not for you. And it's really incredible to see that people don't understand how dangerous that ideology is, because they reject reading any of it, as opposed to pulling out the salient points that can allow for them to critique it in such a way that make it a valuable critique. So that's just my note on that.
I dug into the effective it seemed like there was a crisis of confidence happening in the EA movement, right? Like, oh man, we let this guy in our inner ranks and he was a bad guy, blah, blah, blah. You dig a little deeper, one layer below the surface, the only problem they have with Sam is that he got caught. Literally none of them have a problem with any of his behavior. The thinkers over there in EA, they don't have a single problem with it. They like this kind of behavior. You know what I mean?
It's the ends justify the means stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what characterizes so much of this. If you believe strongly enough in the ends, that they're valid, virtuous, righteous, whatever, then so many people justify any means to achieve those ends. I mean, again, that's on display fucking everywhere in our world today.
Mm-hmm. By the way, the correct thing to do was what Nietzsche did, which was just sit out Nazism. Just go to the country and pretend like it's not happening. It's the only thing you can do.
I was just reminded, I brought this quote up yesterday on this thing that Nietzsche's quote that everything the state has is stolen, everything it says is a lie. I mean, that just captures it so nicely in my estimation. Like all of these, we were just talking about the Civil War, like what we learned, or what I learned about it in school, in public school in the Southern US, was there's this moral, it was a moral camouflage in retrospect, right? It's like, oh, the North was crusading against the South to redeem these enslaved people. It was a moral crusade. But when you start looking at all of those narratives with the benefit of, I guess, the elucidation that occurs going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you start to see that it's all just these different moral camouflages that are being put on to justify the lies and the theft of the state. And that's kind of a bitter pill to swallow, but and maybe this is where I haven't read postmodernism. I've read a little bit of Lacan, I think is his name, which I'm not sure if he's considered a postmodernist or not. And I've read some Nietzsche, but it does seem to me like the lowest common denominator motivation for people is like wealth, property, power, right? We're at the end of the day, we're animals trying to accumulate territory. And yeah, I just think that is clarifying. I don't want to say that again, Jordan Peterson gets off on this, right? We're saying that the postmodernist view of the world is that all of our social institutions are premised on power. And he thinks that's wrong, right? There's this other higher pursuit of human cooperation, the logos, et cetera. And I agree with that, but I think that, again, it's maybe the confusion is rooted in that word power. When I invoke that word, I see it as there's a political sense to the word and there's a physical sense to the word. And the physical sense is, well, we're moving more watts per unit time, or watts, right? Energy per unit time. Whereas the political sense is more like authority, who gets to tell who what to do. And so, again, having not read a lot of the postmodernists, it does seem that is approximately correct to me, that if you consider power and it's in a non-ambivalent way, both the physics and the political sense, that does seem to be the primary motivation of human beings. We're either trying to get more wealthy, satisfy our wants, get more property, or we're perhaps trying to establish ourselves at a higher pecking order in the hierarchy, which is something more like political power. That's clarifying, right? It cuts through a lot of the ideological bullshit, and you don't need to buy it. You don't need to subscribe to one ideology versus the other if you just look at us as a bunch of animals playing imaginary with one another, trying to gain more territory. So,
well, that's the transition, as like Aristotle said, man is the animal with politics, or man is the animal with language. And so it's pretty clear to me that like we're in this transitory phase where we're leaving that animality of ourselves and trying to become something else, but we're still in between. And so we're still dealing with all this violence, all this inability to bridge the gap between what we say and do, and that it is in the pursuit of these things and these questions that it literally starts to transform us. Like I think before we came into Bitcoin, there were all of these questions, but it's only through the ruminating and chewing on it that like it's brought us deeper and deeper. And through bringing us deeper, it's starting to affect and change us as well. Because when we reflect on all of these things, we start to realize that like they're not these siloed off things that don't have any connections to each other, that they're actually real. And that part of these forms of power is truly knowledge itself, and understanding how that knowledge gives us power directly, and how we use the knowledge that is power to directly influence the world itself. And that's something that's pretty different from the classical world, is that even if you had that knowledge, there were still fundamental limitations around all the different things that one could do with it. Whereas now we have a lot more potentiality.
I wonder, so this episode that I did with Jeff Booth and Jackson Hole will come out this week, I think Monday or Tuesday. It's probably one of my favorite that I've ever recorded. And he went into the dangers of exclusionary language. I don't think that's exactly how he termed it, but he's always talking about the us versus them paradigm. It's very easy to slip into that, right? Like we're doing it right now, right? Oh, people in the market is good, the state is bad. It's like, well, really, the state is comprised of people, and so is the market, and it's not that black or white, even though our language may make it seem that way. So I wonder how much of that reality, I mean, I think his general argument is that you're kind of energizing that reality when you speak about it in those terms.
Yeah.
So when you say like, oh, there's good guys, bad guys, or whatever the us versus them dichotomy is, you're breathing life into it just by speaking about it that way. Whereas the reality is, no, we're all interacting. There's a continuum between us, although the individual is real in a sense, right? We have a physical bounded reality. We're also influenced by who we're around. We're a product of our environment, et cetera, et cetera. So I get trapped in this like feedback loop where you're not sure is it because we're talking about it, it's making it so, or because it is so is the way we're talking about it, or is it both?
I have a slightly different
but if we're going to transcend, sorry, just the point of that is like,
no, all good.
Rough question. Like, do we need to get past exclusionary language towards something that's more, another loaded word, love based, right? More encompassing, because it does seem to be a little bit self-defeating when we're constantly trying to label one group bad, one group good. The dichotomy is unresolved, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
That sounds like gay space communism to me, and I reject it. Okay, and I'm just kind of kidding.
Gay space communism. So
I have a slightly different. Rob, I was gonna say, but I have a slightly different perspective on that. I think sometimes you hear this they term, like they're doing things, they're doing this, they're doing that. And I actually think people are kind of afraid to speak out at the moment, which is why they're broadening it to just they, because I think that things are so asymmetric and so corrupt currently that if you were to name someone powerful and their specific wrongdoings, I think it's actually dangerous for your life in many cases. So I think it's sort of it's a diffusion there where people just speak about it broadly. But I do take your point that it's kind of othering, and probably it is, exclusionary.
I agree with that, except that the diffusion is perhaps also a product of the reality, because if I have to draw the line between us versus them, it's like the people paying the taxes and the people, so the taxpayers and then the tax consumers, the people living off of the taxes paid. Now that line is shifting all the time, right? Like, I don't know, how many taxes did you pay last year? Maybe you took a loss this year and you're consuming, like it's all over the place. So I agree with what you're saying, except with the caveat that maybe it is actually complicated, and that's why we're speaking in diffuse language, because it's who are the tax consumers in the world right now? I have no fucking idea. I mean, I have a general idea. If you're a politician in Washington, D.C., you're probably not doing anything productive. So you're probably a tax consumer. If you're a, blue collar plumber working for a living, you're probably a taxpayer because you're producing something of value and you're not in political office. But obviously the gradations between that are significant. So
I got to say, I'm excited for you to read. I think it's chapter 7 in my book, Rob, called "The Sovereign, the Subject, and Crypto Power," because it essentially deals with this Schmittian idea of who the identity of the enemy is. And anytime that like the state has someone that it can label as enemy, it can utilize the state of emergency to put them outside of the law to then be able to essentially adjudicate on its own accords how it wants to deal with that enemy of the state. And that essentially is the production of genocide. And what we have seen continually throughout the 20th century is make an enemy, label them, use that to put them outside of the law, destroy them. And so now with Bitcoin, and specifically with what I call crypto sovereignty, is the ability to literally abscond from that ability through shielding your identity from the state and the amount of wealth that you may have from them, And there's all these other tertiary tactics that are going to come along with it, and the ability to utilize cryptography to do that. And the main function that this has is to be a blinding, like essentially it's the first move to be blinding towards identity. Because the problem is that if we can ever label people as enemies that we can steal from, there's always the potentiality that we can become that person. And so in the essay, I point out that like the Jew, by their very nature and existence, created a state of emergency for the Nazi because that was an other that they could not allow to exist because the way that it challenged the framework of what Nazism was. And so I think that that's really, really important, because anytime that you have a sovereign power that can label individuals and call them good, bad, enemy, whatever, that then creates a predication for there to be a secondary class of law that they can apply to people. And so to me, that's literally what the entire tax structure looks like, is saying these people are subjects, they belong to this particular nation state, and they can do whatever the fuck they want to them. And I think that we're essentially challenging that and making it so that that will no longer exist into the future. And frankly, that like posterity will look back and be like, it's fucking crazy. Did you know, like, if the United States owned you in the 20th century, you just had to pay them whatever they commanded, or else they threw you in jail? Wild.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment that Rob shared, and Jeff has mentioned it to me a number of times. And I mean, I think we all, in the chaos of the news cycle, we get caught up in the framing that it imposes on us, and we also get caught up in the framing that we impose on it. But on a more fundamental level, like I first of all, I agree, but I also I see all of the manifestations of different behaviors and personalities and stuff outside myself as just potential ways I could be seeing things and acting. You know, like, of course, it's potential ways that I could, ideas that I could be embodying to the same degree that those people are, and therefore acting in accord with that. And so, perhaps my rhetoric sometimes betrays this, but I don't really see it in that like dichotomous way. Like, I don't see really anyone as irredeemable, nor do I ascribe like absolute power to anyone or any institution, because at the end of nobody can give that up but yourself, in a sense. I mean, even if this is the who was the guy in the Nazi camps who wrote the book, Viktor Frankl, right? This is kind of his point. It's like, you can be in the jail cell and people still not be able to take your freedom from you, like your freedom to resolve your own, to find your own inner peace, in a sense, to accept your circumstances and find freedom within that, whatever the material reality of your circumstance may be. And so one, I agree that like this is all just, and perhaps I characterize it in more concrete ways so that I can play out those narratives in my mind to see what I think about them, to see how I should construct my perspective within them. And I guess sometimes in dialogue, that gets externalized, and it can seem that it's an us versus them sort of dynamic, but I don't really see it that way. So yeah, I mean, I agree with the sentiment, and yeah,
well, I mean, like how beautiful it is that like literally Bitcoin in its existence, like it can't do an us versus them. Like it literally is incapable of having that happen. And to me, like, that's one of the most important things, is it blinds that identity function. So now we have to recognize and respect the other, who we can never actually know, as being a being that deserves and is entitled to all of the same affects and rules of law that apply to me as well. I mean,
it's like all of our systems, Eric, like up to this point have had to rely on humans, and they've had to be like, let's just get the best humans in there. Well, let's have one human who's the best. No, let's have 500 humans that are the best. You know what I mean? And let's have a full democracy, an entire society full of humans making decisions. No, because humans have bias. Bitcoin doesn't even know humans exist. Has no idea. You know what I mean? And that's why there's no human bias in the system. That's why the system works. That's why the system is a perfect machine, right? And so it's very like, I talk to people who still don't understand this, and they think that I'm lying to them, and they think that there's coded human bias, and that I'm, we're just obfuscating like the amount of human bias that's in the system. Well, don't the devs control? No, they don't. And it's hard to get people to think like a computer network would see, basically.
Mm-hmm. The last thing, what I was going to put on the end of that was, even though like that's I feel like that's my more fundamental orientation in the last year, I guess, perhaps I've tried to be more conscious about to what degree I was feeding into that thing that Rob described. And, so let's just take an easy example. Like someone says something stupid on Twitter and you slide in to fucking own it in some way, dunk on them, whatever it might be. And it's just like, what is that serving? Is that serving anything at all? Is that a worthy use of my time? Is that an adversary that's even, is that a worthy adversary for me? What good is that doing whatsoever? Versus, if you focus on the things that are actually generative or productive towards what you deem to be most important, so one of those things might just be beauty, right? Like instead of being divisive or inflammatory or, combative, why not, like, what if you just took all that time and energy that you would do those things on and just every time tried to focus on something beautiful and propagate that to the extent that you propagate anything out into the ether or social media or whatever. And so, I think that's a more conscious strategy or approach that's born out of the recognition that is true. Like the more that you other people, the more that you divide, the more that you separate things in an us versus them, the more you are, even if in other areas you're helping in some way, you are perpetuating this dichotomy rather than operating on the assumption that each individual can transcend the behaviors that are not serving them and not serving others. And they can start to turn that around, and they can do things that are more in line with truth, and they can engage in more beautiful things, and they can orient themselves toward the good better, let's say. And everyone has that capacity. And should we not do that for ourselves and be a force that allows, or that inspires or assists others in doing the same? And would that not generate a better outcome anyways? Is that not the outcome? Whatever outcome that leads to, would that not be better than a victory over our supposed, ideological adversaries, let's say?
I had a friend, I want to pose a question to your question, which is, I had a friend pose this really interesting thought experiment to me. And he told me that, do you know that the amount of people in the population who have above 125 IQs and the amount of people who are financially free are the same? And I was like, that's interesting. And he was telling me basically like, it may be a function of intelligence that you simply can't have personal responsibility without sufficient IQ. And so maybe there's some leveling up that humanity needs to go through where like we get everybody, because IQ changes over time collectively. And so maybe it's like there's a leveling in humanity where we need to go up a couple orders of magnitude so that we can get everybody to a place where they can actually be the type of person that John was talking about. Because I don't know if people are like capable of it currently.
I think they're capable of an aspect of it, right? They might not be able to like, be their fullest expression of all those things, but can they not start walking in that direction? Can they not tilt more that way? And I mean, this is kind of one of the promises of, hyper Bitcoinized world, right? In that the price signal and the cultural signals that we'll be propagating at that time will be more conducive to nudging people in a direction toward more what I think we'd all agree are like better values and principles, and so that much of which won't even be conscious, as the reverse of that is not conscious to a lot of people today, the so-called fiat culture, all those signals that are getting sent to them and the behaviors that are being inculcated as a result of the culture. I mean, that's not conscious, right? People just say, hey, I'm who I am and I decide who I am. It's like, do you? I mean, a portion you do, you can decide on consciously on certain behaviors, but the motivations for those behaviors and the beliefs on which they're predicated, a lot of that is inculcated by the culture, by the incentives that are presented to you in that culture. So when they change, those things are going to change as well. And yeah, again, like they might not have the IQ to really take it by the reins and like drive hard in that particular direction, but they're capable of responding to a better set of values and principles, let's say, broadly speaking. And so, there's an element of hope to be derived from that.
I mean, to me, it's not about the function of IQ as much as it's the function of the true core belief in truth itself as having a substantial existence. And to me, like, that's what's so beautiful about Bitcoin versus fiat world, is it electrically charges people in such a way that they have to acknowledge that the truth is a real and meaningful thing in this world. And through that like jump starts thinking again, where they can go, oh, wait a minute, like fiat world is this gigantic lie, and that's why everything's so fucked up. And that if I reapproach the world in a way where I understand that there is a capital T truth, and that I can meet other people with the fusion of horizons and seeing that, like I can actually change something in the world in a meaningful way. And then this turns on itself in a really beautiful way, that they go, well, okay, if truth is so valuable in the economic sphere, where Bitcoin with a fixed supply is becoming this valuable just by its nature, what does that truth do elsewhere in the world? What does it do to me? What does it do to my family? What does it do to society? And I think that that's a really, really important core function that sort of electrifies and jumpstarts this ability to frankly change in a meaningful way, and not just sink into the, moat or the swamp of fiat.
I go back to that.
Sorry, go ahead. No,
I was just going to say real quick. I go back to that quote at the beginning of The Big Short that says, "The truth is like poetry, and most people fucking hate poetry." It's like most people are not out here seeking the truth.
So true. I feel like maybe John, if you want to say something on that point, I think I've got a tangent. Maybe I'll be going on.
Well, I'll just comment one thing. The truth, insofar as it's like, the capital T truth, is kind of like hoity-toity privileged thing to be aspiring to, because the mundane aspects of life are sufficiently taken care of that you have that, opportunity or privilege. Like, yes, I think maybe that kind of truth people don't like looking at, but I think truth construed as simply the information that allows you to become united with what you most fundamentally value, I think that's just how consciousness almost works. And so everyone in that context, call it a pragmatic truth, but I think it's a pragmatic truth because it's so fundamentally true. Everyone wants truth in that regard. They want the information, the means to move closer toward the things that they value most. Now, obviously, perhaps a lot of people don't see it or construe it in that way, but I think that's a manner in which that would maybe contradict, Hodl, what you said, because I think that is the type of truth that everyone seeks. Now, maybe the aim, we could discuss whether it's a legitimate aim and whether that aim is in accord with a broader capital T truth, but just the function of truth generally, that there's a magnetism of it, because it's, I think, almost tautologically or definitionally, it's what you require to move toward what is most valuable, or even unite with what is most valuable.
People don't want to be deceived, right?
I think there's this very human thing of wanting to avoid pain, which is why most people tend to reject the truth, because the truth is often painful. And so you basically say, if I accept this hurts and I don't want to feel that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell myself it's not happening. And then you go into denial. And, how many people do we know that use denial as a coping mechanism? It's almost everybody you know. And so, while I think that everybody here is a seeker, everybody's very intelligent, like you guys we're all very aligned on truth. I mean, truth is like, that's the North Star for me. That's the modus operandi of my entire life. I just don't think that Bitcoin is going to provide that sort of seeking to everyone. I wish it would. It'd be great if it did. I hope to be wrong. I just don't see it.
But is it one of those cases, back to that point about the cultural signals and the price signal, that in a hyper-Bitcoinized world, even if you don't have that, strong impetus or motivation to be one of those hardcore truth seekers, it's orienting you toward it regardless, subconsciously, in that that's just the direction that the signals are pointing you, kind of. Do you know what I mean?
I think it go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, I think it helps execute the misalignment that fiat explicitly creates. And I think what's so important about what it does is that it marries the truth and value back into each other in a way that currently isn't possible in fiat. And so it does make the incentive alignment towards truth better, because now in a hyper Bitcoinized world, I look at, say, doing an olive orchard, which olives take like 12 years to get to term and then 15 years to start producing. And then, it can produce for like 2,000 years after that. Well, like if I have like a long-term perspective that like, I want this to be an olive orchard that exists for 300 years, there's no financing mechanism that aligns with that in any meaningful way whatsoever. However, if we're now on a Bitcoin standard, there becomes the possibility of derivatives and things that look like that. Whereas in fiat world, like it's literally impossible to have a timeline perspective on anything financial that is past 30 years. And I'm constantly amazed at that, like literally the only financial instruments that we have that extend out into the future are these strange time periods, whether it's 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, 5 years. Well, what if you want one that's 7 years, 2 months, and 22 hours for whatever fucking reason you have? Like there's all of this space and ability to be able to financialize things in a different way, that once we're away from fiat, it allows for a much more congruent perspective. So I digressed on that moment. Just essentially, like I think the elimination of fiat through the presentation of truth having real value, because it's a solid thing that continually exists forever and it is not superfluous or fleeting or subject to a state of emergency. That's the thing that has real value. And that's the thing, when we speak to it, somebody 200 years from now can nod their head and be like, yeah, I'm in alignment with that. Their truth is my truth too, even though I have all this other insane technology and I live in a spaceship. And yeah.
I can agree to that for sure.
I want to ask another question about truth, but I feel like it's a bit of a can of worms. So Rob, if you've got something you want to go on.
No, let's stay on truth, because I have something else.
Okay.
Let's stay on truth though. I can throw something in on truth real quick. When we say something is an illusion or a deception, I forget where I heard this, but that implies the existence of truth, right? You can't say something is deceiving or illusory without implying the existence of something that is true, right? Because how could you distinguish an illusion if truth did not exist? So for all of this talk about truth, and we're always like, well, is it capital T truth, like the nature of ultimate reality we're talking about, or is it pragmatic truth, true enough to be useful? And we always kind of get lost in the gradations maybe between the two. I think what people really want, maybe this is what you were pretty much saying, John, is that people just don't want to be deceived, right? They don't want to be deceived by others. They don't want to be deceived by themselves, right? If I think eating fucking pepperoni pizza is going to get me jacked, well, my goal is to get jacked. Eating pepperoni pizza is not a good means to that end. If I think that is, then I'm self-deceiving. I would want to know that, presumably, so I could actually get jacked, right? Whatever the thing is. So it's more like cleansing, or I don't know, getting anything that makes the errors persist out of the system, or getting a system that error corrects more effectively. I don't know that we ever get something that generates truth, but it at least discovers these pragmatic truths, which is to just say, we're clearing errors out. And I think that's what we're talking about in the marketplace, right? The free market is effectively clearing these errors. There's a bunch of people that want stuff. There's a limited supply of stuff. How do we reconcile the two? Well, we kind of stumble forward, but the quicker we can clear those errors, the more quickly we can rectify it. So I was just maybe trying to present an alternative way to look at it, is trying to not be deceived or not lie versus trying to always wrestle with, is this capital T truth or a pragmatic truth?
Yeah. Well, let's look at that in the context of what Hodl said. So let's take someone who, we're probably all examples of this at some point in our life, who didn't want to analyze something, wanted to ignore the truth, reject it, hide something in the fog, whatever language you want to use. So is that an instance of wanting deception? Is that an instance of wanting, ignorance is bliss? Is that an instance of not wanting the information that would align you with truth because you don't want to face it for some reason? I mean, it seems like there are many instances of that. It might even be kind of epidemic in culture today.
Well, we were talking earlier about fiat currency being kind of like analgesic, right? That it's
right.
There's an economic catastrophe. We can just print money and pretend like there's more goods and capital than there really are. It creates a short-term stimulative effect. That's a self-deception, or there's a relief to it. There's also a relief to when you take a pain pill, right? Like you have a disease that's causing the underlying pain and you just throw the Band-Aid on it. That's sort of a deception too, right? You're not resolving the root, you're just kind of hacking at the leaves. So I guess there is a utility sometimes.
I think this is an interesting microcosm maybe of like lowercase and capital T truth, because in a sense, like you're valuing your blissful ignorance more than whatever truth you think is hidden down in the basement of your soul or in the fog or wherever it might be. And so whatever is allowing you to achieve that blissful ignorance, that's truthful information for you, because it's the information that allows you to align or achieve or move toward or unite with what you value most. And I think, so that's maybe lowercase, that's the more pragmatic perhaps. I think there's a, capital T might be, is what results from when you apply that mechanics, let's say, two different things, two different ends, two different values. And so, I mean, and this gets into the religious domain perhaps, because I think there's a notion like when you hold which information, when you hold to be most true, most integrates you with what most fundamentally is. And I think you judge that by the results of it, by their fruits you will know them. Like you when you apply, when you're objective, when the thing you value most is blissful ignorance, and you apply that and you treat the information as true in that regard, well, what is the result? I'd say, again, we might get stuck in the weeds here, but broadly, a less integrated person, a less strong person, someone who's degrading themselves on multiple levels. Whereas if you orient yourself to another goal, another end, another value, whatever it might be, because once you get up at the top of that area, it's hard to confine and put borders around and nail down. But if you orient yourself in a different direction, if you treat as true certain information that coheres you with something else, and it actually makes you more integrated, it makes you more strong, it makes you more capable of bearing the burden of life, it allows you to achieve your ends better, see more clearly, all that kind of stuff. Is that not a reflection or a commentary or an indication that that thing to which you are trying to be congruent or cohere with is more fundamentally true than the blissful ignorance or whatever else you may be aspiring to that's not that? Does that come out clearly?
I mean, this is all very confusing, but
I got lost. I'm not gonna lie. I got lost.
All right, so I'm gonna try to swing at it though. So there is this utility to, I don't know if deception may be too strong of a word. There's a utility to representing something, right? To using a symbol. Symbols are very interesting, right? You're using a symbol to represent something. We know that the symbol is not the thing, but the symbol gives us some expedient way to deal with it, right? Like even the words we're using, like the words are never the thing, but we can trade the words around really fast, and that lets us kind of get a handle on these realities that we couldn't process if we weren't using language, for instance. So what am I trying to say? The utility of a deception or a representation, let's say, seems to be expedience. And so there's that old quote that a lie can run around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. Right? It's fast. It's It's like a fast thing. So, but deception, so it's good across space, maybe you could say, right? But deception does not stand the test of time. Because obviously, you know, what the three things that cannot remain long hidden: the sun, the moon, the truth. And if we're talking about like capital T truth, which is the nature of ultimate reality, something like the laws of physics, right? The laws of physics are immune to time, right? It's the opposite of a deception that's expedient and useful. It's something that's timeless. So it's almost like, I think there's this element of symbolism or falsehood or deception built into human rationality itself. Like we always try to use the map and territory analogy, that we're using language to try and discretely map this infinitely complex, fluid world continuum that we all inhabit, right? The map is never the territory by definition, but it's very useful to us, obviously, right? We can all get on the same map and we can connect our minds through language, prices, rationality, et cetera, and we can solve much larger, more complex problems that benefit the human enterprise by getting consensus on these little micro deceptions called words or symbols or whatever it may be. So I'm kind of flailing about as well, but there is, it's not, again, it's not like an us versus them thing. It's like, oh, we need all truth all the time. It's like, no, we actually do need to have these little illusions like money and the nation state and your name and your business. Like these are all useful fictions, useful illusions.
Well, I think the problem with like the money map analogy is that like the real problem comes when one insists that the map is the territory, you know, and
that's right.
It reminds me, you know, like the problem is there's a story about, you know, there's a boat, it's going along, it sees that there's another boat coming along, it radios, it goes, oh, hey, this is the U.S. Coast Guard, we're in command here, you're in our lines, like you need to move. And they're like, yeah, not happening, you guys need to move out of the way. He was like, one more time, like I'm telling you, we're the U.S. Coast Guard, we command this, you need to move your vessel out of our way. And the response is, yeah, we're a lighthouse, this is your move. You know, and like that's really important, because when we see the map as being the territory itself, we will make those insistence to say, no, this is capital T truth, when perhaps it's just a lower T truth. And when we replace the lower T truth where a capital T one, now we're in total error. And I can't help but think about Hannah Arendt's insistence upon what evil is the inability to be able to truly think about what's happening. And so for somebody like Eichmann, the lower T truth was, I'm just doing my job. I'm just following orders. This is the right thing for me to do as a good, upstanding German citizen. This is my truth. Well, when we look at that truth in the larger holistic way, it turns out that it's a cataclysmic error. And I can't help but think that this is the exact same error that is the difference between proof of work versus proof of stake. You're starting with proof of stake from the authoritarian decree of that something is true, and you're moving forward from there. And so for Eichmann, it was true that he was being a good citizen, he was obeying the laws, and he was doing naturally what he had to do with that lower T truth. But he literally didn't have the cognition to consider what the capital T truth is, and whether or not shipping people off to the fucking death camps was a wise thing to do as a human.
So this is, you're hitting the same, like, sorry, I'll just finish this. The mistaking the map for territory, like you just said, Eric, that is, you're misapprehending the nature of knowledge itself, right? Knowledge is always necessarily provisional, contextual. It's going to mean different things in different circumstances. It changes over time. It can never fully capture reality. When you start thinking it can, that's totalitarianism, right? You've totalized knowledge. The other definition of evil is knowledge which believes itself to be complete. So once you think that the map is all inclusive, there's nothing else to learn, you don't treat people the same way anymore, right? For us to have meaningful dialogue, I have to assume that there are things you know that I don't know, so I can like be listening and attentive and receptive to what you have to say. If I'm a totalitarian and I think I know everything, you have nothing to offer me, right? I can't learn from you because I know everything. So this goes back to, I think it was maybe Socrates. There's two types of people in the world, right? there are the fools that think they are wise, and there are the wise who know that they are fools. So it's like gaining this appreciation for the finitude of knowledge, that epistemic reality, human rationality, thought, all of this is limited against the backdrop of a limitless reality with which we're trying to contend.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd also point out the fundamental respect that has to be brought into the equation when we're conversing, and I know that I do not have complete knowledge. I now must respect the other person that I am interacting with, because otherwise, this is a relationship of total. You have no need to respect me because you're complete in knowledge on your own. So there's no need to respect the other individual because you're complete in knowledge of yourself. So I just think that that's an important and interesting facet of it.
I think this is an error that that Bitcoiners have. You know, I'm guilty of this. I think many of us have made this mistake of thinking we had this knowledge that was complete, and you know that you had uncovered a very important truth, and then because you had uncovered that truth, or because you knew that truth, you could wield it sort of as a weapon against other people, and that's not the appropriate way to think or behave. And I think being the wise fool is a much better outcome. And I think over time I've moved from being somebody who was like very overzealous about this in the beginning to being like, yeah, it's probably a lot I don't know, just and trying to be more circumspect about my own understanding of what's happening here. Now, at the same time, though, it does piss us off as Bitcoiners because I know a lot more about Bitcoin than you do, a fucking lot more. So you need to shut the fuck up when you're talking to me. Don't tell me your bullshit opinions. I'm a person with experience. I don't bow to you. You bow to me. Fuck off.
There's the old Hodl we love. But this is the litmus test of a sincere pursuit or orientation of truth, is that type of humility. Because and that's why it's so obvious when you encounter people that don't espouse that, or that are overly arrogant or hubristic or whatever. You can tell that they're serving something other than the truth, their own ego, their own interests, their own gain, whatever it may be. But there's a requisite humility if you're genuinely orienting yourself by a pursuit of the truth. And just one other comment from me, and I'll hand it over to you, Rob. But Eric, that was what I was kind of trying to explain in my rant. Like you mentioned this Eichmann guy in Nazi Germany, him treating, a type of information as truth in service of a particular end. I use the word degrading or disintegrating versus integrative, because I think those are, good ways to look at orienting oneself. And that was obviously a very disintegrating, let's say ideal or objective, and therefore the treating of the information he came across as true in service of that objective. And it was very disintegrating. And ultimately, with the benefit of hindsight, we look at that and say, well, obviously, right? Obviously that's bad behavior. And so my point was, what is the information that when we treat as true leads to a more integrating, more harmonious, if you like, individual self, a stronger, more integrated individual self, and community of interacting people. And I mean, I think this is why the question of like what is true has been the central question of humanity for as long as we have records for. I mean, this is the religious, the theological, the philosophical enterprise, and for good reason, because people recognize that what you most orient yourself towards, what your highest goal is, will determine how you treat the information that you come across. And it will be extremely consequential how you treat that information, i.e., will you shove someone into an oven and incinerate them alive? Or will you operate with yourself and the people you engage with in a manner that is conducive to mutual respect, flourishing, strengthening, productivity, whatever we might construe there? There's nothing more consequential than that. And I think that's why this question has been so central. And the last part of that is just, I think this is also the delusion or illusion you referred to, Rob. It's almost like we come out of the womb, right? We're just a blob of nothingness. Like that's the first separation from our mother. And then we add on all these things, name, interests, blah, 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 that serve to separate us, make us unique from everyone else. And it's almost like the journey of life is like going into that, multifarious identity space, but then piecing together ultimately the things, the understandings, or the information you need to recognize your fundamental unity with everyone. So going from unity to multiplicity back to unity. And I think that's one of the functions of distortion, false information, delusion, is because I think that is contending with that properly is the journey toward discovering and embodying virtue. And what is virtue other than a word we use to point toward that highest place and the aspects of it that we can bring down into our life and display in our action. And I think, that is part of the function of the potential for delusion and evil more broadly, is making you develop, recognize, and embody and stand up for that, those virtues. And it is in doing that makes you integrated with what is in the highest place, or what is most fundamentally is. That's kind of more clarification on the point I was trying to make earlier.
But you have to contend with it. You have to contend with it. You have to be willing to ask those questions. It's when those questions come, you go, whoa, 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 no, fuck that. This is, To me, like that's the critical issue that allows for somebody to stay in lower T truth, not thinking comprehensively about the world in a lower way. Is there is an unwillingness to sit and meditate with the questions themselves. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
No, I think it's an excellent point. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say a lot of these people are low T. I agree.
Well,
Nice.
I mean, being high T is a result of being properly integrated with the truth of the world. That's just when you're integrated with proper nutrition, when you're integrated with nature properly, integrated with good relationships, high T is the outcome. That's a fucking example of what I was talking about. That's what results when you're oriented and integrated properly.
That's so good. So there's no final answers, right?
Right.
That's kind of paradoxically the final answer, is there are no final answers.
Well, I think everything resolves in paradox ultimately, right? That's kind of the spice. There's no brick wall at the end of any pursuit. The actual cosmos, our inner domains. I mean, it's just
right.
Everything's cyclical in that sense.
Well, the deep continuity.
The beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it allows us to all come up with our own question, our own answers for that question, what is true. And then it gives us enough money so that we can colonize distant worlds, and there will be a planet of people that all believe like Eric Kaysen, and there will be a planet of people who eat eggshells on top of their breakfast like John Vallis. There'll be a whole planet of these people. And so this ends like Dune for all of us. That's my theory anyway.
Which is great, right? That's a definite success metric for the human race, that we've more of me, as the comedian Louis C.K. says. That's what the man's premise on, like more of me.
Did he?
But
Internet's
you cut out, Eric.
Oh, did Louis C.K. ever get it, or is he still just poking the bear?
I think that's a parody.
I think
account.
Louis C.K. is not the guy on Twitter.
Yeah,
it's not his account. No, it's a parody.
Oh.
Sorry, guys. I was really excited when my favorite comedian followed me, but it's not him.
Speaking of Twitter happenings, I needed to give John and Rob, you guys get a lot of kudos for orange pilling Jordan Peterson, because I just saw him like a week ago being like, Bitcoin fixes this. Take heed, peasants. I was like, God damn, they orange pilled this guy.
Yeah, that was
I don't know where he is. We're still trying. Okay, I want to say, all right, I have so much to say now. All right. So John, your point like on virtue, I think because isn't the word virtue, isn't it derived from a word for truth, virtus, something like that?
Yeah, veritas.
Yeah, so it's like this struggle to try and embody what is most useful, right? So to embody these pragmatic truths. honesty, discipline, valor, whatever the most useful pattern of action to the I guess collectively determined society at that time, that tends to be virtue. So they're tools, right? They're just like all these other fucking tools that we use. Now what I really wanted to talk about though was tying this all the way back to Kaysen's point that I think I'm just now starting to really see the light on, and I'll try and say what I'm seeing here. So you made this point, Eric, that when we blind the identity assigning function of the state, right, that the state is no longer able to decree, this is your social security number, this is what you do, this is who you are, that we're somehow maybe preventing the capacity, we're preventing ourselves from reducing one another to a label, maybe is a way to put this. And when you reduce someone to a label, like we're talking about the deception being an expedient, it's very easy to just write someone off like, oh, it's a fucking bleeding heart liberal, or oh, that's a redneck conservative, right? You reduce someone to a label, you totally discount their sovereignty, right? Their individuality goes to zero once you put them in that bucket. And so again, it's an expedient, it's useful, maybe if you're just going to deal with someone in passing, but the trade-off to that expedience is you're giving up a more intimate knowledge of their individuality, right? Just by virtue of using that label. So maybe which is to say you're discounting their individual sovereignty. So by reducing the ability of the state to assign these labels or identities, maybe we're actually reducing the amount we discount sovereignty in one another. And so, to view individuals as individuals, to actually look at someone and be like, this individual is unknowable to me. I can never, just like anything else you look at in the world, you can never fully capture it in language. You surely can't capture an individual in language. That through that linguistic change, if that is a linguistic change, that we develop more of an appreciation for the actual sovereignty and unknowability of the individual. Like that seems to be a major cognitive change. And I want to give a weird example, because so it's like, all right, I'm going to take a left turn here. We're talking about how we talk about one another, how we think about one another, how we relate to one another. There's the expedient path. I can just put you to a label, or I could be your best friend and really spend a whole lifetime getting to know you and yet never fully know you, kind of thing. And there's somewhere in between. That seems to be kind of reflecting the inner struggle between our angel and our animal, right? Where I don't want to see a thing on Twitter and react to it and call someone a piece of shit or whatever. I want to try and be more like Jeff Booth, Bruce Lee, like let that negative energy pass through me, put out positive energy. I had that's like a personal anecdote. I saw what's his name? BitBoy Crypto the other day. Someone was passing around a video of his, and he's just, this guy's like fiat incarnate.
You really wanted to call that guy a piece of shit?
He's real, he's fiat incarnate, dude. Like he's like, I think he was accusing Corey Clipson of wanting to put his hands down the pants of like Gary Gensler, like something that doesn't make any fucking sense at all. Like it's just preying on stupid fucking people. Again, here I am using that horrible exclusionary language, but clearly like tilted towards idiots. Like no one's going to believe what this guy is saying unless you're just dumb. And I wanted to write, I actually typed a tweet out and I was like, there's going to be a huge grease fire in hell when this pig finally ends up there. And I wanted to send it so bad, but I just couldn't. I don't know. My inner Jeff Booth angel was like, no, why? Like, what is this going to do? This serves no purpose. You're going to call a spade, but it accomplishes nothing. Like transcend, delete the tweet, move on. And so I ended up deleting it, but I just wanted to give a personal anecdote of this wrestling. Like there's always this, there's a big tendency or motivation to want to just label someone. And then once they're labeled, you can denigrate them into the ground,
Yeah.
But you're sacrificing the truth of who they are, which is, I don't know that guy. Who knows? Maybe he'll do something great one day. I have no idea. But
the other an element of that is always like when someone veers off course, let's say, just for the sake of argument, there's no ambiguity in that assessment. They are veering off course. I mean, I think the higher self, let's say, would recognize that the appropriate response is compassion, right? Because they're cutting themselves off from the truth and all of the goodness that springs forth from it, let's say. And so, those people, they may be more deserving or more in need of your compassion and guidance, should you care to give anything at all. Now, obviously 99.9 times out of 10, it's just going to be apathy and like, I'm going to let him be in his own world and all those other people be in that world, and I'm going to focus on other things. But, that seems like it would be the appropriate perspective to have on something like that. Let me ask you this. Why did you want to write that? Other than the impulse because you think he's harming people and you want to maybe needle him, point it out, but what you recognize, and that's why you deleted it. But what are you contributing to? What are you gaining and what are you contributing to by actually communicating that to the world?
It was definitely an impulse, but I think and I didn't know this consciously at the time, but when I'm looking at it now in retrospect, this is 2 days ago, probably, I think I was triggered by him saying that about Corey. It's almost like you're rising to defend a friend. You're like, fuck you, dude. Like, what are you like? My friend wants to put his hands on the pants of a regulator. Like, what? That doesn't even make, like, you're such a fat piece of shit. You're going to burn in hell forever. Like, I just wanted to, like, I was triggered, I guess. And
nobody's perfect.
I will say, as somebody who has let their id run wild on Twitter, fully unhinged for years at a time, it's so freeing. God, does it feel good? It feels so good. Until
You're so good
it's
at
only,
it.
yeah, and it's only later when you go, yeah, there's some blowback here. I probably shouldn't have said all that shit.
But what's worse, the blowback externally or the blowback internally when you realize that perhaps you've acted less in line with what you deem to be most virtuous in the future sometime?
For me, it's more external
it's definitely
because I'm always just I'm just goofing around, and then some people take it wrong or whatever. You know what I mean? It's I kind of enjoy dialing up the chaos, but a lot of people can't live there. It's a very, you know what I mean? It's like you get bounced off quick when you live at 11. And
incidentally, is the reason why you were the first person I reached out to when I started the podcast. Because I'd be on Twitter, I'd be like, man, I love the way this guy gets down. I want to have him on for the inaugural episode. Well, but you know what you said? You said we had it booked, and then like a few days before you wrote me like, yo, I gotta reschedule. I'm gonna be hungover that day. And so that's why Sessions ended up being the first.
That doesn't sound like me at all. No, it's you know what was interesting for me, and here was the value in it, was being that character on Twitter was very freeing. It allowed me to over the years, I had this issue, like I had a real problem like pre-Bitcoin where there was an invisible rule book, and for some reason I knew all of its rules. And everybody I knew all of its rules, and I lived in strict adherence to all of its rules. And then one day I realized, why do I live my life according to an invisible book that I've never seen or heard? It's culture, it's dogma, it pervades my life. Everybody around me reinforces that I have to be this specific way, and I fucking hate it. I hate every bit of it. And having Bitcoin and having that like feeling of, the first time I made a Bitcoin transaction, I've said this before, but I felt scared. I felt nervous. And then when the transaction sent like it was supposed to, suddenly that nervousness, I felt empowered. It transformed me in that moment. That sounds cringe or whatever. I don't care. That really happened to me. And from that moment on, I set forth on a different path in my life, truly. And I created this character to burn down all of the dead wood that was around me. I started saying, you know what, instead of this invisible rule book exists and I'm going to follow all of its rules like a bitch, I started saying, fuck this book, and fuck you, and fuck everybody else, all right? I'm going to say whatever I think and feel, and I'm going to let the chips fall where they may. And I spoke a lot of truth to a lot of people, and it was beautiful. You know what I mean? And then I realized there's an abundance of truth thing that can happen too, where you've gone too far, you've overdosed on the truth. And just like there are white lies, there are also black truths. You know what I mean? And so you don't need to tell everybody every truth every time, every minute of the day when you think it. You know what I mean? So I backed off a little bit. I moderated a little bit.
But you know, that is a pretty good example, because you know, I don't think we're saying here like never express, because unless you're going to be a monk in a temple, like not saying anything forever, you're going to engage, you're going to express out in the world, and that's going to be in relation to things you see. And if you want to be true to yourself, like sometimes you're going to say things that other people a bit, or that rub people the wrong way or whatever. And like, again, if you want to be the monk, sure. And maybe that is how everyone should be. Who the fuck knows? But presuming we're not all going to be like that, one of the things that's fascinating with you is, I mean, at least from my perspective, obviously some people took it the wrong way, but you know, I would say I always could tell where it was coming from. Like, and people would hit me up. I think I'm not sure if I ever shared it with you, but you know, people would say like, how can you have this guy on your show and stuff like that? He's this, that, and the other thing. And I'd write them back, like, you don't get it. You know, you're not seeing what's really going on here. You're like, and so, but because of that, most people, like, you know, came to appreciate it, right? And most people, you know, you're a lovable character, let's put it that way. But because despite the, you know, the actual words you were using and throwing out there in the ether, they could tell what was animating it behind it. It wasn't malevolence. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't evil. It wasn't meanness. It was jest, you know, broadly speaking. It was an expression of liberation that you just described from the strictures that you formerly subjected yourself to, let's say. And so
absolutely
so it's not all bad, right? That is, much of that is good. And look at the good.
Yeah.
It's one, produced in the lives of others, the people that you affected, the shamed into stacking more sats, you know, all that kind of stuff, but also how it's enriched your life, you know, all the friends you've made as a result of being that type of person and communicating that way. Look at all the relationships you've built. Look at all the experiences you've had as a result of that. And back to the point, just last thing, back to the point earlier, it's like, how do you judge the legitimacy of the information that you both intake and express outwardly? It's got to be in the outcome, right? I mean, how else could we judge it? And that seemingly is a pretty good outcome that you've established from acting in the way you have.
Well, I appreciate all the compliments. Obviously, they make me mildly uncomfortable, but it's you know, it's like Peterson's thing of like, speak the truth and see where it takes you. My life is a million times different than it was before I started being more outright with what I was actually thinking in my head. Though before that, I was just walking around thinking these thoughts and then keeping them to myself. And then once I started just saying it, me and Eric were talking about this when we were in that backyard in LA. By the way, I was supposed to do a documentary, and I went to the documentary crew and I was like, I'm bringing some people with me. And they were like, okay. And I was like, no, yeah, you have to put Eric Kaysen on camera. And so I forced Eric to be in the documentary. And then I came back into the room. I was drinking wine in the backyard with some girls. I came back into the room. The documentary crew was in love. They went from being mildly annoyed I had showed up with Eric to being like, bro, you said it all, man. I fucking love you, dude.
That's always the case. That's always the case.
And that's because Eric speaks his fucking truth too. I mean, everybody up here does, but like, people have really responded to Eric recently because of like the things he says and the rants he goes on. And like, Eric has given it to you as Eric sees it. And it's fully authentic and just, you can't help but like love a person who's just telling, especially when you can tell that person has a good heart and soul and they're telling you how they see things. You know what I mean? It's always interesting. Everybody else is just wandering around like reciting shibboleths about like, oh yeah, hey, fucking diversity is our strength. Like, Jesus Christ, kill me. You know what I mean?
100%.
Well, I appreciate those outlets. That was a really cool interview because like as we got into it, like I was about to go into all the philosophical stuff and I was like, hang on, like you don't happen to be familiar with Giorgio Agamben, are you? And like the dude producer, he's like, yeah, actually, I'm like really well read in Giorgio Agamben. We like studied his stuff before we did direct action stuff back in the 80s. So yeah, I know 100% what you're talking about. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So we just dove immediately down and I was like, yeah, so Bitcoin's about the state of exception sovereign theory because it allows for the inability to create an exception to the law that labels us and allows for us to then become other people that could be destroyed and have our wealth robbed from us. So it's like a really great thing. But yeah, it was a great interview. I've been wanting to circle back to what Rob was saying about this idea of respecting people's sovereignty, and that like this comes back to Emmanuel Levinas's thesis that he asserts in Totality and Infinity, is that by us respecting the other truly as an individual who we can have no power over, we open up a space of infinite potentiality that that other person has to be able to be who they're supposed to be. You know, so when we label BitBoy Crypto as being a fat, sloppy piece of shit that will never amount to anything in the world, while that probably is absolutely true, there is the possibility of him redeeming himself and him being like, you guys, like, I realize that like me selling advertisements to shit coins and dumping on all of this retail is a horrible thing to do. And I'm sorry. And I don't want to be that in the world. Like there becomes a potentiality to open that by us accepting and allowing for him to have the sovereignty that he has, other than unilaterally saying, hey, fuck this guy. He's a fat, sloppy piece of shit that's going to try to sell you shit coins and rip you off. So don't trust him or listen to him. And if you see him on the road, throw rocks at him. You know, whereas like being compassionate and open allows for the potentiality of him to see his own mistakes and to correct them according to however he can, which is much more in line with capital T truth. Because we don't know the potentiality that another person has to unlock and open themselves. And maybe there becomes a quintessential event of the truth being electrified inside of him going, whoa, this crypto stuff is no good. And I have Bitcoin. And these Bitcoiners have actually been trying to help me hear and understand this message. But, you know, in the lower example of Rob, by us, you know, saying these mean things to him, maybe he doesn't get that and he closes down to it because we haven't respected his sovereignty in the same way that we would like our own to be respected. So I just think that that's a really interesting and an important point about the value of allowing other people their sovereignty. It's not about just feeling good. It's about the real quintessential truth of the potentiality of a totality that other person can deliver. That's valueless. You know, fuck BitBoy Crypto. He could make a cure for AIDS. I don't know. Maybe he'll, you know, who knows what he can do, but we gotta afford that. Hodl thinks it's hilarious. He could cure AIDS. No, he couldn't. But
I agree. I think it's a unique role to be the jester in the right way, with the right attitude, with the right heart, with the right intention behind it, which is perhaps why it's such a rare role, but why it's so highly regarded. And everyone else, you know, should perhaps have the orientation that Eric just described. I mean, again, I think it's the more true one anyways. It is true that anyone can be redeemed. It is true that anyone can change their behavior. It is true that people can go from doing quote unquote so-called, you know, bad behaviors to good ones. That all of that is true. And is it not the best use of our attention, should we choose to devote it to such people or things, to try to treat it as though we expect it to go in that direction, rather than solidifying the behavior that they've done and hardening those people in their place as in an us versus them sort of dynamic. So, you know, I agree, but I think this is why the jester is an eternal character, and why these different archetypes, let's say the king and the philosopher and the poet and the jester, I mean, these are always going to be with us for that reason, because taken together, perhaps that helps us steer the ship in a more or less better direction. You know, the arc bends toward truth or justice or peace or integrity or whatever, however we want to construe it.
This is why the deplatforming of Alex Jones from every big tech platform all in unison was so concerning to me, because that is the death of the jester, right? Alex Jones is not a serious person. Nobody's ever taken him seriously. I mean, he says funny, ridiculous, crazy
people
things.
take him seriously. Let's be real.
Well, they started taking him more seriously after he was deplatformed, right? Because it's a Streisand effect thing. Once you shut somebody up, then they go, wait a second, why'd they shut him up? What was he saying? What was he saying what did he get right? You know? And, you know, then we saw a wave of censorship come after that. And anybody who plays that role now, like Andrew, they just did it to Andrew Tate, right? Anybody who's playing the role of the jester, they're letting their id run wild on the internet. they're going to get taken down because we are in tyrannical times.
And that's
Look,
the
like,
canary.
I'm not one. I'm not one to defend Tate in any way, shape, or form. But the fact that he's being held without charge in Romania is concerning, you know. And to me, like, this is what it always comes back to, is about the actual function and rule of law itself, which I don't think exists anymore. But the fact that, you know, he did a lot of shitty things and is a shitty person, but like, I want him accountable to law as opposed to just being unilaterally held by the quote good people because he's a bad person. Like, that doesn't work for me.
I was just going to say that when you see the censorship coming down on the Jester archetype, that is a very troubling canary in the coal mine, right? Because the Jester's telling those truths that others are scared to speak, or maybe even they're like subtle truths, right? That often the punchline to a joke is like you're saying something everyone already knows to be true. They just never thought about in that certain framing, perhaps. And so when power tries to come down on that, right, or when authority tries to squash that subtle truth telling, that's very dangerous, right? This Peterson talks about this a lot. Like, once the king comes down on the Jester, like, you should be concerned for that society, because basically the king is not tolerating the truth telling that was coming from the Jester. So
you could also say it's an indication of the fragility of the king's domain, because he sees even the slightest slight, you know, the slightest like poke as being a threat to his order.
It's totalitarian.
Yeah.
I mean, what I think is so interesting in our field is that, like, the Anon is the Jester who, like, we can't get rid of in any way. And I find it so interesting that Peterson has gone on these diatribes against Anons for a while, because to me, like, the Anon is one of the quintessential figures that, like, I actually think in the end, like, the Anon is who fundamentally.
We lost Eric.
Come on.
Oh,
Yeah, his best rants keep getting cut.
I know.
Yeah, don't live out in the middle of the woods where it's super windy and stormy. That's well, actually, thinking about where society's going, maybe you guys should just be comfortable with be comfortable with the 15-second cutoff. Okay.
Eric, maybe I'll cue you up to finish the rant here. But I think one of the things with Peterson, and the reason why he hates Anon, is I actually think that Peterson has been the victim of bot farms. And so I think that there are special interests that have been going after Peterson. And when people don't understand what it is to be a large account. I'm sure Rob understands it better than anybody. He's the largest account up here, but like, it's a totally different experience to log in when you're a large account. I mean, you are just being pummeled with shit and it's just flying at you. You can't just casually read through what other people are doing. Like, people are trying to drag you into shit. Like, people are trying to, do psychological warfare on you. I mean, it's brutal, man. And so for Peterson, he's been a victim of that at scale. And I think that's why he hates Anons. It's a very stupid opinion of his that he holds, and he needs to get rid of it. You know?
Yeah, it is. And he engages a lot, man. Like, he's retweeting.
He'll retweet an account
comments.
with 10 followers that said something against one of his views, and he'll lash out at them like aggressively. It's like, rule number, internet engagement 101, leave the trolls be. Focus on the I don't know, making a better argument, or all the stuff we were saying earlier about, positive direction of things.
Right.
In all honesty, I find Peterson to be quite an emotionally sensitive man, like in a positive way. And I think he also has like CPTSD from like dealing with the shit from the internet, from his generalized stardom. So like, I have empathy for what his perspective is on it. I just wish that he could allow for himself a little bit of emotional distancing to think about it a little bit more and offer a weighted critique as opposed to general lashing out. But I mean,
it's one of his greatest strengths that he's so sensitive to feedback. And even with like in the personal interactions I've had with him, he's the guy that he is on stage, so to speak, is the guy who he is in person. Like, he's actually listening to you. He's actually thinking about what you're saying. He's actually responding. And so maybe that strength, though, applied to, 5 or 6 million Twitter followers, whatever he's got going on, and all that chaotic, all the things Hodl just labeled coming at you, maybe a sensitive predisposition is not the ideal, not skill set, but what is it? It's his nature, I guess. And maybe we're just seeing that, right? It's kind of a personal blemish getting burnt off out in the public eye.
I think it's also, none of us can appreciate, and maybe this is a fault of his to bite off so much, but none of us can appreciate just how many like scenes or like places where he's commenting and involved on things, whether it be political, economic, social, psychological, blah, 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 all the way down the line. And, you know, to be at all capable of doing that in any domain, you have to spend a lot of time reading, keeping up on who's saying what on the blah, on so much stuff. And so I think he spread himself extremely thin. And given that, I think he does a tremendous job of, you know, focusing in on what is of utmost importance in each of those realms. But you got to have some sympathy for someone who bites off so much and who attempts to, I mean, you know, maybe there's an ego aspect of it too, and maybe that's somewhat condemnable, but you got to sympathize with the guy who's, I think he's trying to do good. He's just trying to do it in so many different domains and doing so much work that you're going to swing and miss in places because you're just overwhelmed by the magnitude of it.
The amount of at-bats he's taking, right? We're going to see a lot of swing and a miss. And this is kind of like Hodl was saying earlier about the black truths, you know? The creative process is fraught with risk, basically. So if you're going to be the Jester, you're going to tell some black truths. You're going to tell some bad jokes. You're going to piss some people off. So I mean, there has to be some tolerance, I guess, for that too, that Peterson is trying to do a lot of stuff. So we got to give him a little leeway, but yeah, the opinion on Anons is worth shit.
Yeah, I totally agree. But luckily, I mean, this maybe bringing it full circle before we shut it down, but you know, we're talking about deplatforming and all that kind of stuff. And with each day, it seems like freedom is gaining new ground, you know, like something like Nostr pops up. Again, who knows when these things pop up, you know, what the legs are like and how persistent it'll be. This one seems like it's got a lot of legs. But it's amazing. I mean, imagine a communications and information landscape now and increasingly into the future where, you know, you don't have to associate certainly your so-called real identity with those things, but even, you know, better, you can take your identity platform to platform anywhere you go. You can't really be deplatformed because you can just pop up on another platform without any real loss. And then, you know, you sprinkle in the financial incentive that's being built into these platforms, and, you know, social media, communications, payments is all becoming censorship resistant. And not only that, I mean, that's very exciting for, you know, the deplatforming that we alluded to earlier that's been, you know, really egregious over the last 2 years, notwithstanding Elon's recent takeover of Twitter. But it's even more exciting because when platforms or companies or apps can't ring fence their users in the way that they traditionally have, when there's not that moat, think about the competition that fosters for these apps to offer a better experience to the people who use them. Because I'm on Damus and I'll go wherever else if it's way better. And I have really nothing to lose by doing that. And so I think it's going to be this insanely rapid iteration of tools that we can use. And what are those tools going to be most oriented towards? Well, they're going to be towards the problems that we most feel, which is being deplatformed, being censored, not being able to say what we truly believe, not being able to communicate or transact with who we want to, all those things. And so now I think this just has opened up a massive can of worms, is the wrong thing because that's kind of a negative, but like it's really going to accelerate the options that we have for being more free in many domains of our life, you know. And then you sprinkle in a little AI on top of that, and who the fuck knows what happens, because that shit's getting really crazy too.
So I'm wildly bullish on Nostr. I've been spending a lot of time on Nostr, and the interactions I'm having there, the engagement that's there. I mean, it's a real thing. Nostr has a network effect.
And
that's always been the problem with like the mastodons and trying to port Bitcoin Twitter somewhere else. I also think like there's this thing that the energy in Bitcoin moves. It was on Bitcoin Talk, then it was on Reddit, then it was on Twitter, then it was on social audio, and now it's on Nostr. And so it's like Bitcoiners are always very tech forward, and they're always moving forward to the new thing. And the fact that we now have uncensorable comms in addition to uncensorable money, well, guess what? We're really fucking expensive to tyrannize, really expensive. And that's the best thing that you can be, is extremely expensive to fuck with.
Totally. That's the name of the game. You do that long enough and the ones that want to fuck with you atrophy because they just can't the returns aren't there. They can't keep it up.
Right.
I mean, I think that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Rob if he's on Nostr.
I've got to get on it. No, I haven't done it yet, but I am shadow banned on Twitter, and Twitter support doesn't respond. So I think that is my sign. I need to get on Nostr.
Yeah, you got to do it.
Yeah, I've had a ton of fun on Nostr. I begged for a sandwich on there last week. It was. I like made some side hand comment about how you could like make money and you get like a sandwich from Nostr. And everybody was like, "You just really want a sandwich, don't you, Eric?" And I was like, "Yeah, you guys caught me." They're like, "Here's the money. Like, go have your sandwich now." But
I mean, I know,
just like this.
I know this is a super rudimentary thing, but that's, you know, everything's rudimentary in the early stages. But just 2 weekends ago, I was watching the fights, having a beer, and I just tweeted on Nostr or posted on Nostr like, "Who's at a bar and wants a beer?" You know, and people respond with, you know, a photo of the bar they're in or the receipt. I zap them the cost of the beer. And I just bought someone a beer in fucking India, New York, bottle of wine for somebody just sitting in my home. And, you know, it's those kind of like random acts of kindness, generosity, whatever, that are way more powerful than people probably think on first glance. But it's super. I did
one last night or the night before. I was sitting around getting drunk, and I was like, 100,000 sats to the first person that can name the best Rolling Stones album. And for the first person who said the correct answer, which is Exile on Main Street, and if you don't believe it's Exile on Main Street, get fucked. That person, I sent them 100,000 sats. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it scales up, because if you do that while you're drinking, you're a lot looser with your sats. Well, I have found
another thing that's interesting about Nostr in specific is that if you want better engagement, you want to have a better conversation with your audience, it has a totally different. It has sat specific incentive mechanisms built right in, right? So like when I see comments that are good comments, I send the person sats. So I'm like, "That's a dope comment, man. I fucking really appreciate that you did that, zap." And also there's a lot of talk about just getting rid of the like button entirely. And so on Nostr, we're going to move to just zaps, which is sending sats to people via the Lightning Network, for anybody who doesn't know, and then repost. So you're either putting up something on every post. You're either putting up money, saying, "I like this post, here is money," or you're saying, "I like this post, I'm going to boost it using my reputation. It's costly because I'm boosting this with my reputation," right? And so I think that's just because likes are just nothing. It's just this weird facsimile.
You're talking about this would be on a specific client, right? Like Damus, for example, because you know, people can do whatever the fuck they want on whatever client for likes and.
Exactly. They can do whatever they want, but this has been a topic of conversation. And I think a lot of people agree, not just on Damus, but on other clients as well. It's a really interesting idea. And the interesting thing about Nostr is not a Bitcoin thing. It's not a Bitcoin app, right? It's just something it's an uncensorable freedom technology that's been built by Bitcoiners.
Mm-hmm.
And that is fucking exciting because it's actually not a Bitcoin thing. It's a Bitcoin adjacent thing. And if you believe in the Bitcoin story, you believe that everything is going to be a Bitcoin adjacent thing, right? And this is one of the first big ones. Yeah.
And then to your point,
there's the uncensorability of it. Can someone just explain that to me? How it's not related to Bitcoin yet it's uncensorable?
It's just a protocol. Yeah, so it's short for note. Well, what does it stand for? Notes and other stuff
transmitted by relays.
Notes and other stuff transmitted by a relay. Exactly. Basically, Rob, it's just you run a relay, and there are all these independent relay operators. Some of the relays are paid relays. And by the way, if you want to get set up, I'll just, me and you can do a private call, and I'll set you up with all the shit you need to know. But basically, like you just, you subscribe to some of these private relays, paying in sats. The relay operators are kind of like how to think of it. They're like media.
Is it a BitTorrent? This is a BitTorrent thing.
You could think of it similar to torrenting, just because of the way that the nodes operate.
Similar, but this is a brand new thing. It's a brand new protocol, and that's why it's so exciting. And listen, by the way, I'm not as technically proficient as some of the people I talked to about this, but Rodolfo gave me a whole speech about it, what a big deal it is, and I believed him because I can see it. I can't fully articulate it, but basically he was telling me that what Fiat Joff has created with Nostr is equivalent to what Satoshi created with Bitcoin in the way that he took a bunch of other things like private public key cryptography and combined them with this dumb protocol relay and all this other stuff. And basically Nostr is not just social media, but it's the ability to re-architect a lot of things, and people are now building marketplaces on Nostr. People are trying to do GitHub on Nostr. There are all these bounties for Nostr development. The speed and rapid iteration of Nostr development is on another level. This has been taking up a lot of my time and attention recently because I have this heuristic that whatever the nerds are doing on nights and weekends is the thing that's the big deal in 5 or 10 years. And this has soaked up all of the best and brightest minds, the guys in Bitcoin who I really respect. Now they're all on this. And man, it's really exciting. I was watching some of the conference stuff and just the speed and pace of innovation and the ability to, like, you can run your own Nostr node on Umbrel. If you're running an Umbrel node, they hooked up a private relay. So you can run your own private relay to back up all of your posts on Nostr. So now you have a permanent record of all of the stuff that you've ever put out on the internet, and you can't be banned or censored. It's all there, right? And if you want to run your own relay and push it to others, a public relay, you'll be able to do that as well. It's a little more technical at the moment, but it'll get easier over time.
Yeah, I mean, what's being developed here is so exciting because like it literally has the potentiality to pretty much replace most things in the web, most particularly social media, but like across the board. And what, to me, the most important part is that now we get data purity in a very, very important way, because there's not all of this micro pushing and fucking with us on the back end to try to sell us a bunch of garbage. And furthermore, we're going to be able to adapt our own algorithms in such a way to promote some people, depromote other, certain topics. And so now we're really owning our data, but also the algorithms in a very powerful way that allows for us to reclaim, because like the internet is something that our generation with other people on the planet today collectively created together, and very few of us get direct benefits of that. And so if the next iteration of the internet, we all get to own that directly, it's going to have huge and massive ramifications across the board for how people can conduct their life, connect with people, socialize, create economics. And with it having this backing of both Bitcoin and decentralized nature, it makes the political apparatus that's imbued into the internet right now essentially flaccid and incapable of doing the same kind of fucking it's been doing.
Nostr is the only Web3 thing that's actually interesting at all, period, point blank. Everything else is a bunch of bullshit. And it's interesting because China censored it fucking immediately. The Chinese got on there and they started running relays, and the CCP was like, shut it down. And we were all like, let it go, baby. Let it go. So it's exciting.
Well, it was all this Chinese, and then it would be like fiat Jaff, bunch of Chinese, fiat Jaff, bunch of Chinese.
I was like, why is my whole feed Chinese porn all of a sudden? I have no idea.
The Chinese censored it though, so that means it's not uncensorable.
Well, behind the Great Chinese Wall.
Oh, okay.
They took it out. No,
took Damus out of the App Store.
They just took it out of the App Store. That's all.
But you can have a desktop, app client, whatever, easily. The thing, my last comment on it is just, I don't think. I mean, this kind of, again, in line with this like exponential growth sort of thing that we can't really predict them, but just a simple integration of a financial incentive, and not just any financial incentive, but like the Bitcoin financial incentive in digital content that you can easily publish and propagate now, I think is going to have such dramatic and beneficial effects. Like, it's so early, right? So it's just kind of fun with small zaps, but like there will be an incentive to propagate quality content, video, photo, written content, because right now in like Twitter, I still think it's generally people prefer things that are uplifting, that are beautiful, that are that are good broadly, and I just think all that stuff will be far more incentivized. And so you could put out a tweet or you could put out a video, and I mean people are doing this now and they're getting millions of sats zapped to them. Imagine how many people are really on Nostr with a Bitcoin wallet, like in the thousands, maybe, over 10,000, who knows? But imagine when it's tens of millions and hundreds of millions. Like if you put out something that's really quality that people like and everyone zaps you 10 cents, you just made like a fuckload of money, Right. So I think that incentive is going to draw people in, and it's also going to radically upgrade the quality of what's being published and propagated. And great, right? More quality. This is the exact thesis we've always talked about in a Bitcoin world, elevating the quality of discourse, of productivity, of everything that gets built.
I was just going to say it's Saylor's orange check thesis, just not inside of Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a decentralized version of that.
I kind of feel bad because I feel like Elon's heart was in the right place with the whole $44 billion takeover of Twitter. And like, there's way less censorship now. And man, I wish that had happened, 2 years earlier. But it is what it is. And Nostr seems pretty confident that type of architecture and the benefits that are to be derived from it is the future. And Twitter is going to be increasingly seen as, a dumpster fire, basically, even if whatever
isn't it beautiful that like he paid 44 billion and Nostr was created by a couple of guys working in their spare time for free? Like, of course, how could it
kind of always the way it is, right?
And wasn't it around the same time? Like he bought Twitter and then Nostr came online, basically.
Yeah, well, Nostr was developed earlier, but it became popular because Jack
became popular around the same time.
I think Jack gave Fiat Jeff like 10 Bitcoin or 8 Bitcoin or something like that as a grant of some kind. But it's always this is the digital version of the proverbial garage startup, right? Like IBM and Apple, right? Like IBM's the behemoth, 2 guys in a garage make Apple, and we know the rest of the story. Twitter is the behemoth. A guy, couple people build this new protocol, on their own time for basically nothing other than their time. And it ends up supplanting, the big incumbent, which again is too bad because Elon's probably a better overlord than, your typical IBM or, gigantic corporate whatever. But
by the way, there's this feeling on Nostr. Here's one thing that I've been really loving about it. And I'm sure it'll change and shift over time. But like right now in the social media version of Nostr that we're using, I usually use the Damus client, but there's a bunch of clients you can use. Many of them are very good. People are very cool. People are very chill. Pretty much everybody's a Bitcoiner.
Very good.
A lot of the people we like. The vibes are crazy awesome. And there's just like this emphasis on like, all right, these are where the people who are motivated, who care, who are conscientious, this is where they're hanging out. And I don't know, man, it's really cool to see. It makes me feel like the early days of Bitcoin in a way. And it's exciting. So I don't know where it's going to go.
I'll get on it.
I'm stoked.
All right. Well,
it's a lot of fun.
That's 3 hours. So we can shut it down. But I will say this before we go. This is my last comment. I don't know why.
3 hours?
I don't know why.
Let's do 3 more. Let's do 3 more. No,
let's do it.
Well, in line with that, I mean, I don't know why I feel this way, especially considering how fucking hard it was to get this one put together. But maybe it's the times we're in. I don't know, but I'd like to do this more often. So don't answer now. But if I'd like to bump this up to like maybe a once a month sort of thing, and we can just kind of riff on what's going on technically and everything else. So have a think, and we can chat offline about who among you are down.
Well, it's a great notion, but it takes us 3 months to get a 1 month thing scheduled. So
maybe
well, exactly. That's so we go for the 1 month, and we'll hit it every 3. I mean, that's kind of the.
All right.
You know what we should do? If we were gonna do it once a month, we should do like the last Sunday of every month at X time. And then just kind of try to stick to that. I don't know.
Right.
It's tough to schedule.
Have it firm in the schedule. And not
we're starting a church.
Prioritize it a little bit.
Yes.
Well, this is like the post-church social. I got to get high for these more often. That'll help out.
All right. Well, any last comments from anyone before we shut it down?
Before we shut it down, what would be dope? I went to Peter McCormick did a thing with Jinseth live in New York, and I went to it at PubKey. We should do one of these fucking live. And we'll all just, hang out in a bar with good Bitcoiners.
PubKey guy invited me to come do a bunch of shows up there. So that sounds like a good excuse.
It's funny you mentioned that. I've been thinking about that for like the last 2-3 months. And again, I don't know why it particularly dawned on me, but let's talk offline. I got some thoughts to throw at you guys.
Let's go this summer.
Yeah. Or Miami.
New York City's great this summer. Is everybody going to be in Miami?
I'm not going to be there, unfortunately.
I'm TBD, but doubtful at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know.
Dude. I got to see you recently, Hodl, but it's been like a year.
We'll just do it. John. That's cool. We can get together, some other way, some other place.
If you guys, if you guys don't mind flying to California and then driving,
no, fuck that. Absolutely not.
Woods,
we'll fly you to New York City.
Yeah, we'll meet
we'll
on
go to-
some more accommodating territory, Eric. I'm sorry.
That's
Dude,
fair.
I'm telling you guys,
That's fair.
PubKey is fucking awesome because it's exactly the vibe you're looking for. It's just a shitty dive bar in New York that's full of Bitcoiners. Like nothing could be better. You know what I mean? Not to shill
Love
it
the
too hard,
sound of
but
that.
big.
It's in New
big
York. It's in
fan.
New York, though. It's a little.
Yeah, that's a little
sus.
bit of a problem.
Well, it's a great place to visit, though. New York City in the summer, great to visit, great to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, I'll send you some thoughts offline, and we'll continue
All
the
right.
conversation. Gents, always a pleasure.
Gentlemen,
We'll talk again soon, hopefully.
Much
Okay.
love, my
All right,
friends.
guys.
Be
Much
well.
love,
guys.
friends.
Bye, everybody.
Peace.